be a part of the oceans and sky. When I was young, before my life, I was a part of the oceans and sky.
All right, here we go again with another in the series of Huxley's Brave New World Order. And this is episode 5 and part 2 of Mockingbird. In this episode, we will be looking again into George Orwell's life. His first wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, and his second wife, Sonia Brownell. With me tonight, as usual, is our Chris.
Good evening.
Evening. And this is going to be a bit of a magnum opus, isn't it, Chris? To say the least.
I said that at the beginning. I saw where it was going.
Orwell's first wife was Eileen O'Shaughnessy, and she's a bit of an enigma. She was born on 25th September, my birthday, 1905. And I wasn't born in 1905, though. And died on the 29th of March, 1945. She was born in South Shields, and I think she died in up there as well. Well, I know she died up there. I think she died in South Shields as well, Durham, England. Her father was Lawrence O'Shaughnessy, who was a customs collector. O'Shaughnessy attended Sunderland Church High School. At the time, Sunderland High School was a mixed private day school located in Sunderland, Tyne and Wear. Founded in 1883 as the oldest girls' senior school in Sunderland. It's now owned by the United Church Schools Trust. Sunderland High School actually closed in 2016, where Eileen O'Shaughnessy went. And the United Church Schools Trust is one of the 100 largest UK charitable organisations in the UK. The charity is operating under the name United Learning as of 2012. United Learning is one of the 10 largest charities with the most employees in the UK. Aged 19 in the autumn of 1924, O'Shaughnessy entered St Hugh's College, Oxford, where she studied English. There she received a higher second-class degree. I think I'll come to this, but I think possibly she was taught by C.S. Lewis as well.
Right.
And Tolkien. So there's, again, the mix where she's marrying in...
to a new fiction guy.
Aldous Huxley died on the same day. C.S. Lewis... it's a strange mix. According to what I've read about her life, by choice, there followed a succession of jobs of no special consequence. We've all been there. And with no connection from one to the next. Jobs which she held briefly, and which began with work as an assistant mistress at the Silchester House an all-girls boarding school in Taplow in Thames Valley, and included being a secretary. She was also a reader for the elderly Dame Elizabeth Cadbury, with more chocolate links there, if you remember in the last one, Fry's chocolate and what have you came up. And obviously that links back to the plantation type things where...
sugar,
and and cocoa, where Orwell's great-great-great-grandfather, Blair, owned a plantation there. So maybe there is some kind of link or a setup of getting these two together. O'Shaughnessy was also the proprietor of an office in Victoria Street, London, for typing and secretarial work. When it closed down, she took up freelance journalism, selling an occasional feature piece to the evening news. And she also helped her brother Lawrence, who was a thoracic surgeon, by typing, proofreading, and editing his scientific papers and books. In the autumn of 1934, Eileen enrolled in the University College London for a 2-year graduate course in educational psychology, leading to a Master of Arts qualification. Although I've also read a conflicting story that said she left early when she married Orwell and gained no qualifications. That's another thing you seem to find is that there
contradicting stories.
Yeah. The University of London Psychology Department at the time, O'Shaughnessy was there, was headed by Sir Cyril Burt. Burt's father, also Cyril, initially kept a chemist shop to support his family while he studied medicine. He became an assistant house surgeon at Westminster Hospital, London. One of Cyril Burt's famous patients was Darwin Galton, he's another mix, brother of eugenicist Sir Francis Galton. The Burts made visits to the Galton estate, which allowed the young Burt to learn about the work of Sir Francis Galton, who also allowed Burt to meet him on multiple occasions and to be strongly drawn to his ideas, especially studies in statistics and individual differences, two defining characters of the London School of Psychology, whose membership includes both Galton and Burt. Remember, the Galton and Darwins are married into the Huxleys, and Thomas Huxley was known as Darwin's bulldog. In another twist, Chris, Sir Francis Galton lived and died in Hazelmere, Surrey.
All right. That's where I said we used to live.
Yeah.
Where they did the what is it?
Yeah. Hazelmere was the place where the BBC's Hannah Fry, is that more chocolate links, presented Contagion, the BBC 4 pandemic exercise about the possible impact of a flu pandemic in 2018.
Yeah.
The programme used Hazelmere, Surrey as the site of the first simulated infection, and coincidentally, in February 2020, the town saw the first recorded case of a person contracting 91 Divok from within the UK.
We did a whole show about that thing, didn't
we? Yeah. Another coincidence.
And that was the beginning of the track and trace app.
Yes.
That's when they were trying out in that TV show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In July 2022, Fry presented the BBC doc Unjabbed or Unvaccinated, in which she investigated why a portion of the British population remained unjabbed against 91 Divok. Hannah Fry also went to UCL. Just like Cyril Burt, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, and several others in this story, they also went to UCL. Fry is a professor of mathematics of cities at the UCL Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis. She studies the patterns of human behaviour, such as the interpersonal relationships and dating, and how mathematics can apply to them.
Jelly beans.
Jelly beans, yeah. The Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, CASA, CASA, is a research centre in the UCL, which specialises in the application and visualisation of spatial analytic techniques and simulation models to cities and regions. The centre is active in exploring how the Internet of Things can be deployed in large urban areas, linking objects in the built environment through the Internet technologies. The centre specialises in urban informatics, geospatial intelligence, geographic information systems, urban modelling, the application of smart city technology, and complexity science. Sounds like 15-minute cities, Chris. Back to Cyril Burt, who, as I said, spent time at the Francis Galton estate, which was possibly which was in Hazelmere. Despite his lasting reputation as a statistical psychologist, Sir Cyril Burt was also involved in psychoanalysis. He was a member of the Tavistock Clinic Council in the early 1930s and of the British Psychoanalytical Society. Burt was elected president of the British Psychological Society. Burt was also a member of the British Eugenics Society.
Oh, every box ticked.
Tick, tick, tick. Now called the Adelphi Genetics Forum that we mentioned in the last one, and we mentioned it before, I think, but he would have definitely known Sir Julian Huxley. Remember, Julian Huxley was president and chief executive, anyway, were president and vice president, I think, of the Eugenics Society at different points. So these people are all intertwined. That's not any mad thinking on our behalf. They are intertwined. Burt suggested on radio in 1946 the formation of an organisation for people with high IQ scores. He was made an honorary president of Mensa in 1960.
Right. So did he invent Mensa then?
Yes, he came up with the idea that we should be testing people with high IQ scores, which seems quite benign until you realise that he was a member of the British Eugenics Society and into psychoanalytical evaluation.
Like he's putting out a big fishing net there just to... Well, I suppose it's like anything, isn't it? Grabbing talent, I suppose.
Well, the grabbing talent that...
Or genuine intelligence.
Well, again...
Rather than surface intelligence, you know.
Well, whether it's genuine intelligence or surface intelligence...
I don't know,
the questions that will be asked from a Mensa perspective to say you've got an high IQ are all following the mantra, aren't they?
Psychological questions, probably, I would as a guess.
And if you fail, that means you're a pleb. But you're not necessarily a pleb.
It just means you don't fit into their world.
Into that box, yes.
Yeah.
And you might not fit into their world either. Doesn't mean to say that... You never know. Mensa might mean you're a psycho.
But if those IQ questions, which I've never done, I've got no idea, I've got no interest in that stuff. But if those questions are to test your IQ, what's your IQ mean? You know, and I think that's what you're trying to say is it could just mean that you're pliable, or you can be used, or it could mean anything, couldn't it?
Could, yeah. But what we've got is at the time that Orwell's first wife, before he knew her, is studying psychology with a guy who's a eugenicist, and he came up with Mensa. And he's heading up the psychology department at the same time.
And they've got the word IQ on everyone knows that word.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's
yeah. Oh, he's a member of Mensa. She's a member of Mensa.
He's got an IQ of this. He's got an
IQ of 100 or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So Cyril Burt published numerous articles and books on a host of topics like behavior genetics, most notably in studying the heritability of intelligence as measured in IQ tests, using twin studies as well. Always need a couple of twins.
Good old Nazi twin studies.
Hopefully they were blonde and blue.
I'm going to say blonde.
That created the most controversy. That was the twin studies, frequently referred to as the Burt affair. It has been generally accepted that he fabricated some of the data. Don't be doing that. Maybe Professor Ferguson will. The first research project that was to define Burt's life work in quantitative intelligence testing, eugenics, and the inheritance of intelligence. So the twin testing was part of that.
He's not sounding like a very nice fellow. This fella, to be fair.
No, yeah. One of the conclusions in his 1909 paper was that the upper-class children in private preparatory schools did better in the tests than those in the ordinary elementary schools, and that the difference was innate, meaning intelligence was existing in or belonging to or determined by factors present in an individual from birth.
I'm really shocked that he came up with that conclusion, aren't you?
Yeah, considering these poor kids probably working in a workhouse,
or in a fucking covered in soot, cleaning the chimney.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean that all that's been obviously proven nonsense now. But
that's the eugenics thought process there, isn't it?
It is. It is. But I mean, if you think about the eugenics movement, a lot of these people aren't. I mean, look at Boris Johnson. You wouldn't say he was intelligent, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had a high IQ. I mean, and he's just a pathological liar. Yeah. And again, for me, this is what we're seeing through this research. And what it's done for me is I can't say this is about religion. I can't say it's just about what family you've been born into. I think there's something more than that. And I think I keep coming back to what you said about the Damien Omen film, where because it really resonates that, because you could just be an ordinary guy. Yeah.
Well, also, that fits into what we've talked about before, which is that the king with his illegitimate kids living in the village.
Yeah.
And even though the kid didn't know it, he's still getting looked after and spoon-fed jobs, etc. Do you know what I mean? I'm making that up, but it kind of fits into the same scenario, doesn't it, in your mind?
But do you know, like, there's a favourite, you know, and you can't work out why. Say you're in class and there's a favourite and you just don't understand why. Or a parent has a favourite, or an uncle has a favourite of a nephew, or whatever it might be. There's some sort of connection to this system, to this parasite, if you like, that draws this person to this situation like a moth to a flame. Yet other ones in his family or her family aren't drawn the same way. And they could all go to Oxford, for argument's sake, as well. They
could choose them because they see, when they're kids, they could see that lack of empathy.
Yes. Yeah.
And or that psychotic gene, you know, that I mean, I know you don't want to slag off kids, but we've all met kids. I always see kids as like adults. You get on with some and you don't get on with others. Some you shine to, some you don't shine to. And you've all met those kids who are a little bit too aggressive at too young an age.
Yeah.
You know.
But is it just about that kind of aggression? Because you could get someone who isn't outwardly pulling flies' wings off, for argument's sake, and spiders' legs.
I used to do that.
Yeah.
What a horrible little bastard.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, maybe it's not the aggression as in physical aggression. You don't have to be physically aggressive to send 50,000 people out of a trench.
Yeah. No, I was making that up as an example. Fact, what I mean is maybe they see something that we don't see.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe they can be trained easier. Again, coming back to that MK Ultra.
Or in like that Godfather scenario, like in the film Godfather, where Marlon Brando, Godfather knows, you think it's going to be Sonny who's going to be the leader of the gang, but he always knew it was going to be Michael, even though he didn't want to be anything to do with it. But he saw the potential.
And he didn't really want him to have anything to do with it.
And nobody knew he was the right man for the job.
Yeah.
Because he was cold.
Yeah. And that, to me, all these things, you know, when like Mark's research, even Dave McGowan's and things like that, when we're talking about these military backgrounds, these people going to Oxford or born into these families, there's something more than just that. That's where I'm getting the feeling, because not all these people, right, are evil. I think a lot of them have been traumatized, but not all of them are. It's just impossible. They can't be. And I'm not even saying George Orwell's evil,
well, maybe it's not.
or Aldous Huxley, but for some reason they're willing to carry something through and pass that baton on to the next person who's carrying it through.
Maybe it's just another way of life that we will never understand.
Yeah,
like in 1984, where the proles, and like I've said this before, I think, that the Winstons aren't us, because when you read that, you think we're the Winstons. We're not the Winstons. We're the proles. Winston's are probably he's probably an actor or a TV presenter or a politician, because even in 1984, as we're talking about it, Winston's the guy who is an editor of news, isn't he? He drops everything down the memory hole.
Yeah.
So he's, I suppose, what you call now, he's the Mariara Spring.
Yeah.
You know, propaganda. But he didn't even want to do that job, and he knows it's wrong, but he's still dropping news down the memory hole.
Yeah. So
the equivalent of that would be a newsreader, for the previous nonsense. Maybe they're saying things, they know it's wrong, but there's a hold on them that they can't ignore.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting conversation, because I think there's something more than just, for argument's sake, Jim Morrison's dad were an admiral. I think there's something more to it than, because there were loads of admirals. Why Jim Morrison? You know what I mean? It's not necessarily just. I know that's a factor. I'm not saying I'm not trying to play down or take away from Dave McGowan's work, because that was fantastic work. But
no, but also you understand as an example, he's an admiral, but maybe he's an admiral who's a Satanist.
Yeah,
maybe the other admiral isn't, and he is, and he's part of that gang. So he's in the gang of a gang of a gang.
Yeah.
And
The
maybe he
1%
didn't
of the
even know
1% of the 1%.
exactly. And maybe he didn't. I mean, I don't want to, but it is that pyramid level, isn't it? But even maybe on a more of an extreme than we've ever discussed.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get at. There's something I'm calling it the Prometheus bloodline. Forget people going about, oh, it's Jewish people's fault, it's Muslims' fault, it's this,
bollocks.
And I just think that's absolute nonsense.
Well, again, but that comes into
now
the fact that there's no countries. The countries are for us to squabble and argue about. Religions are for us to squabble and argue about.
Well,
somewhere there's something else, which is maybe even the Masonic things for us to squabble and argue and point fingers at, whatever. Maybe there's an elite or a percent, and it's something else. Maybe it is a demonic. Maybe it's something else. But that's what, and they're filtering down what. And I do think right that getting us to do stuff, i.e., go to war, like you say, get out the trenches and shoot people, or give out certain medical procedures. Maybe that is the score. It's not that they actually even lift their hand to anything. We do it for them. And that is the ultimate
slavery.
The ultimate slavery and the ultimate signing of the contract.
Yes.
We're signing contracts all the time, aren't we, by agreeing to things. And even say you're an assassin, right? Like in a film, and you're going to assassinate someone. You've done that for someone who's told you to do it. They haven't got their hands dirty.
And you've also done it for someone who's told you to do it that can whack you as well.
Well, exactly. But maybe they don't even get, and like recently through the jibby jabs, they've got people who've trained to do it, to dish this out. I mean, it must be the ultimate hand rub, the ultimate.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. You just have a vision of some.
The ultimate.
We have got people who have trained and sworn to look after people, to damage people. I mean, on a fucking karmic level, that is evil genius.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And like we said right at the beginning, they would be the first ones to throw under the bus.
Like your Winstons, they're probably less. They're probably more precautious.
I don't even think doctors are the Winstons. I think it's, or maybe they are. I suppose they are, aren't they? Yeah. Anyway, just chatting. I don't know.
Yeah, all right.
We know nothing.
But there is, but throughout this research, that's what's occurred to me and Chris, as you can hear him talking about it as well. That there's something behind all this. I mean, people. Yeah, we can take a lineage back to Frankfurt and look at bloodlines there. We can take a lineage back to Robert the Bruce and further back and all. And we see all this, and they all are aligned to it, and it interests me. But there's something more behind that that's controlling this, and that the chosen ones, helped by successful peasants, which is probably a Winston, hungry for entry into this secret club that they never get to. They're never going to get there. They're not one of them ever. Yeah. A successful peasant is not going to get into that secret club.
Wancock springs to mind.
Wancock. They're not going to get into that secret club. The thing
you remember when we did the Johnson stuff?
Yeah,
and it almost seemed like it. I mean, we don't know any of this for a fact, but it almost seemed like his dad was buying into the club. He wasn't part of the club. Was he bloodline fire?
Who his dad?
Johnson's.
I think it was through his mother.
I think his mother.
Illegitimate line.
So again,
that's a proper Damien Oman line.
Yeah.
It's that.
So
line,
maybe back in his day, he was hungry for it and married into it, and then drove that poor woman nuts. Who knows? I mean,
who knows?
Like we said before, is there different factions of these psychos?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's several factions.
Their egos are too big not to have infighting. Yeah. That's for a fact.
But again, the Prometheus, whatever it is, whether it's whatever you class as an alien or an entity or something or some things, different ones,
driving them along.
Doesn't care. It's the trading places dollar bet. Look at Johnson and Cameron fighting. They don't care. It's irrelevant to them.
Yeah,
because
maybe somewhere in the background behind that big heavy red velvet curtain, there's, maybe there's an agreement that no matter what happens, they're not allowed to actually tell the truth of what is happening. Yeah,
well, that's the Machiavellian parasite, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the Machiavellian parasite. Anyway, back to this Cyril Burt. In 1913, Burt took a part-time position as a school psychologist for the London County Council. So this eugenicist became a psychologist for a school for London County Council, with the responsibility of picking out the feeble-minded children in accordance with the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913. This is in Britain.
Right. So the beginning of the actual sterilisation, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Incidentally, the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913 was an act of Parliament here in the UK creating provisions for the institutional treatment of people deemed to be feeble-minded or morally defective.
Right. What does that mean?
Well,
well, it depends.
Means that anything they want it to mean, Chris.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, exactly.
It proposed an institutional separation so that mental defectives should be taken out of poor law institutions and prisons into newly established colonies.
What, abroad?
So if you remember, I mean, that's the Nazis take. Maybe this were a plan then and it didn't work, and they allowed the Germans to try and do it.
Yeah,
or the communists. Or
well,
whoever.
I mean, it was England talked about it. America did it to an extent, and then the Germans copied it, didn't they? Is that right?
Well, the Germans certainly. Well,
Americans actually did it though, didn't they?
Yeah, the Americans did it. Yes. Yeah.
Sterilized who they thought wasn't
the feeble-minded.
Feeble-minded, yeah. And it's funny we talk about this now because today, for some reason, this popped in my head was, the whole mental health thing. They've got people. Again, they've got people actually signing up for it themselves, not being deemed mentally ill. They've got people now talking about their own mental health, quite openly, and euthanasia, and signing up for drugs, saying I've got mental health. I mean, no,
I'm on the spectrum. I'm on the spectrum.
I'm on the spectrum. But people are actually instead of it used to be you got your finger pointed at you, and then you ended up being labeled mental health. People are openly saying I've got I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but I spoke to a young lad working in where I was working, and he said he was going to the doctors, blah, blah, and I said, "What are you going to the doctors for?" And he said, "Oh, it's just mental health stuff." So what I mean is people are signing up for this mental health thing, and if you remember a few years ago when they brought in the thing where you don't have to be labeled mental by two doctors, it's just one, etc. Is this lining up for something in the future, Fatty, where you've now got a history of mental health problems, even though you maybe haven't or maybe have whatever? But
what does that mean, though?
Well, it didn't mean anything. I'm just saying.
No, I know you know that, but
yeah,
I'm being general in my terminology.
No, but what I'm saying is, what is it lining up for in the future? So now they've got.
Well, we know, don't we?
They've got 30 out of 100 kids who've now got mental health issues, and they've actually owned up to it themselves, and they're on the register, etc.
Well, we can thank Prince William and Premier League footballers for sitting in a changing room with sweaty socks lying around and football boots with mud on them and stuff, admitting that they're suffering from mental illness.
Yeah,
on BBC.
Well, I would be if my dad had whacked my mum. I'd be fucking had mental health issues as well.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. The bill for this pool, what did I call the bill? The Mental Deficiency Act of 1913. One of the people that voted against it, there were only three that voted against it, 3 MPs. Remind you of anything back in 2020? Voted against it. One of them was Baron Josiah Wedgwood, a relative of the Huxley family and a proud Zionist. So he voted against this, but he was a Zionist anyway. The University College London, Tavistock. Remember, this guy worked at Tavistock. He was there at the early epicenter of Tavistock.
I mean, knowing what we know now, fact, you would hazard a guess that they just threw in a couple of objectors just to make it look like.
Quite possibly, or maybe they knew there were going to be a couple of objectives. Who knows, right? It's sort of irrelevant, isn't it? But can you believe they actually passed that? When I saw that, I thought, I can't even believe that. I never even heard of it. I didn't realize they'd done that in Britain. I knew they'd done it in America, or in some states.
Well, I think I remember hearing that the Americans got it. We started it, and they took it.
Oh, definitely. Francis Galton started it,
yeah,
and Darwin they kick-started eugenics,
yeah.
As we're going to come on later on in the series.
Yeah, and the Americans were the Nazis were in admiration of the Americans and us for.
Well, the Nazis were in admiration of Sir Francis Galton.
But then again, like we said, if there's no countries and it's just a system they want to get in place and they want to see how it works out, it doesn't matter if they were Nazis, Americans, or
it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, again,
that's one thing. In my instinct, that is one thing I'm pretty sure of.
As we covered with Dr. Ewan Cameron, right, who was part of the cleaning up of Germany in the Nuremberg trials. He went to question all these horrible Nazis who were experimenting, and they came up with these laws that you can't experiment on. Then he went back to Canada via Scotland and started experimenting on people with LSD and tying them down and electrocuting them and stuff. But yeah,
might as well though.
But all these colleges, Eton, Imperial College London. Now, the one thing I will say, and again, not everybody who goes to Eton is, in fact, 99.99%, I'm sure, of people that go to Eton are nice people. Yeah.
Of course.
That 1% of 1% that have been traumatized or recruited into security services.
By having these schools, Oxford, Cambridge, Eton, it's not the fact that they are, I mean, the gangsters, as we've talked about before, but you're putting all the people in one place.
Yes.
So, i.e. the most learned, whatever, or from the families or whatever, all in one place, so you can watch them and then choose which ones you choose to do what.
As we've seen.
Just quickly, something that popped in my head today, so I'm going to mention it just because it popped in my head today. You know that the 7/7 bombings, one of the buses blew up in Tavistock Square.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember the images of the bus destroyed, and in the background you can see
Tavistock.
Tavistock.
And as we know, let's not forget Tavistock is, as we speak, the place to go for gender reassignment.
Well, not now, because closed it down, didn't they?
Well, sort of.
Apparently they went too far.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. This shows the multi-generational nature of what we're dealing with. You're talking of somebody who worked for Eugenics Society, was working for psychoanalytical societies, was at the University College London. This was the person heading up George Orwell's future wife's training in psychology. And again, I'll say this again, I think we mentioned it last time, both Aldous Huxley and George Orwell's wives, I don't know if it was Aldous' second or first, but it was, both were married to psychologists or therapists. And
also, in fact, you're saying about the second wives, it was quite rare for people to get divorced in them days and then remarried. That wasn't, I'm making this up because I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't a regular thing.
But one other thing that comes across, especially in this one about Orwell, is most of these people had open relationships.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like said that Orwell had an open relationship, his wife had an open
relationship. You imagine that in the 80s, never mind when these guys were knocking around.
I know.
That were, everything was religious. Everything. Yeah. The whole country was run on religion still.
Yeah.
Even back
that's my opinion of it. That's what I thought it was. And as we pointed out in part 1 of Mockingbird, Sir David Petrie, who was Director General of MI5, our own internal security service from 1941 to 46, Petrie worked in the Imperial Indian Police, or Indian Imperial Police, between 1900 and 1936, at the same time as Orwell did. So all these things where, Cambridge, Oxford, we've already shown that they were recruiting professors at these places. And, then he goes to India and is working at the same time. So anyway, there are always these links, these tentative links there that you can't solidly prove that he knew the Director General of MI5, but he ended up working for security agencies over here for quite a period of his life, if he was alive. Eileen O'Shaughnessy was at University College London with a lady called Elzvita Fenn, pen name of Lydia Jackson Jaburovich, who was a fellow student who became one of O'Shaughnessy's closest friends. They met for the first time at UCL. She said that Eileen, who was 28 years old at the time and looked several years younger, she was tall and slender, shoulders were rather broad and high. She had blue eyes and dark brown, naturally wavy hair. George said to her that she had a cat's face, and one could see that this was true in a most attractive sense. Elzvita Fenn was also a pseudonym. She had 3 names. Her real name was Lydia Velitva Zaburovich, a Russian-born daughter of a Tsarist official who emigrated to England in 1925 after the Russian Revolution. That's some time after the Russian Revolution. I know there was some I know it went on a while, all the aftershocks and that. Anyway, she obtained a DPhil in psychology from Oxford University in 1949 and focused her practice on child psychology and psychotherapy. She also worked for the BBC in the 60s. So just like that, she enters a country and goes on to study child psychology and psychotherapy at UCL, Oxford. And this was way before 1949, by the way. This was talking mid-30s, early 30s, yeah, when she was at UCL. And she just happens to be at the same place as Eileen O'Shaughnessy. And there's another bit to this as well, which is quite interesting. We can see clear influence that Cyril Burt had on Eileen O'Shaughnessy. She was also particularly interested in testing intelligence in children, and quite early decided upon to use this subject for the thesis she would be writing. This is something else that Orwell, as I said, had in common with Aldous Huxley, both married psychologists stroke psychotherapists. She was very close to her elder brother. He was a surgeon, and she described her brother as one of nature's fascists. So she's left-wing, he's a fascist. Brought up in the same family. He was apparently killed in the retreat to Dunkirk. Eileen met Orwell in 1935. At the time, Orwell was living at 77 Parliament Hill in Hampstead, occupying a spare room. So here we go again with the story that is poor, right? In first floor flat of a lady called Rosalind Henschel Obermeyer. Now, she's an interesting character as well as this lady. Rosalind Henschel Obermeyer decided to throw a party and invited her friend Eileen, whom she knew from her psychology courses at UCL. So she also went to UCL. So let's just have a quick recap. Orwell was renting a room from Rosalind Henschel Obermeyer, who was a would-be psychologist, who invited her friend from UCL, fellow psychologist O'Shaughnessy, to meet with Orwell, both trained by UCL professor Cyril Burt, who was a Tavistock eugenicist.
It's interesting that they have all this information logged. Because, I mean, how much information about our family do you have logged anyway?
Yeah, not much. Not much.
It's logged. And also...
It's logged as well in odd different places that you've got to pull together as well.
Yeah. But the fact that it exists, though, how much information could you find out about our grandma?
Very little.
Zero. And also, you just think of the fact that they could actually hide anything, whereas now not so much with the internet and cameras, social media, etc. But then they could get away with anything, couldn't they?
Yeah.
So what I mean is, like, going back to Orwell's other wife, where she's flitting from job and colleges and da-da-da, no one would have
been interested in that.
No one would have been interested or noticed or thought anything about it, because you're seeing the groundwork being built for now, aren't it?
Yeah. So
there's no reason to be interested in it.
No. O'Shaughnessy and Orwell were married in 1936 on June 9th at St Mary's Church, Wallington, Hertfordshire. Obermeyer, the lady where he rented his room from, was a niece of a famous conductor and composer, Sir George Henschel, whose grandmother was Henriette Henschel, maiden name Frankenstein, born Dresden, Saxony, Germany. His stepmother was Charlotte Henschel, who was an Oppenheim.
What, as in nuclear bomb Oppenheim?
Well, I don't know. I didn't do the genealogy on that, but I know they come from Frankfurt, that name comes from Frankfurt. So
I don't know many Oppenheims.
No, but the Oppenheimer diamonds as well. So there's a quite famous family, more than the Oppenheimer.
All right, so maybe it's a name.
Yeah. Sir George Henschel made music records. He was a composer, as I said, as late as 1928 for the Columbia Graphophone Company. Remember that from the first one we talked about, Chris?
Yeah.
One of the earliest gramophone companies in the UK, founded in 1917 as an offshoot to American Columbia Phonograph Company. That's some right names going back then, didn't we? We spoke about these in episode 1, but I'm going to go into something here because it leads on to something else. Columbia Records is an American record label owned by Sony Music Entertainment, a subsidiary of Sony Corporation of America, the Northwest division of the Japanese conglomerate Sony. Today valued at $100 billion, and it's one of the top 100 companies in the world. This is where the research goes off on a bit of a tangent, but ends up tying back up again with mind control operations and its origin and uses on different generations using electricity, telecoms, and broadcasting as weapons. Well, so, for a few... What do you say? Go on.
No, I'm going to say, well, brainwashing, Columbia Records, Columbia Films, Sony Films. I mean, you couldn't get any more brainwashing, could you, than that?
Apparently, Chris.
Is that Columbia ISIS diner? I guess.
Yeah, probably. So, for a few minutes, I'm going to indulge the conspiracy nut job in me and Chris and divert our attention away and then come back full circle to the Huxleys and Orwell. If you can remember, we mentioned in episode 1, the graphophone company was the name and trademark of an improved version of the phonograph invented by Thomas Edison in 1887, which was funded by J.P. Morgan. Edison developed many devices in fields such as electric power generation. All right, everyone says that was nonsense. It was Tesla, but let's just go with this for the moment. And that was the General Electric Company, or GE. He also invented mass communication, sound recording, and motion pictures, all funded by J.P. Morgan, who was funded in turn by the Rothschilds.
Just quickly to cover that Tesla caveat, because I think General Electric funded him, didn't they?
Yes.
And then when he died,
Tesla were funded by J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan and General Electric.
Yeah.
When he died, they just took all his stuff.
Yes.
Just before anyone mentions that, because they will.
Yeah. Edison was also a eugenicist. Seems to be a theme running through it. Eugenics, the idea of creating better citizens, became popular in the 1880s.
Better citizens, not killing anyone.
You're a better citizen, no.
Yeah.
Eugenics, the idea of eugenics ideas were embraced by scientists, politicians, feminists, because they cared, and many others, including President Woodrow Wilson, Thomas Edison, and Alexander Graham Bell. The graphophone was an improvement, as I said, on the gramophone, and was invented by Volta Laboratory, established by eugenicist Alexander Graham Bell. To have two eugenicists controlling early frequencies technologies, I don't think should be underplayed with hindsight, do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Edison also controlled the electricity power, and Graham Alexander Bell, the Bell telephone company that was AT&T.
Right, and you think of that Steiner thing, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. We mentioned that Alexander Bell was mentioned in Shelby Downer's book, The Carnivals of Life and Death, and him being on Jekyll Island, which is...
Sorry, that's what I meant to say, Shelby Downer, not Steiner.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Also backed by J.P. Morgan Rockefeller at the Masonic ritual sex magic orgies involving children on Jekyll Island at the Jekyll Island Club.
Right, bloody hell.
Yeah, I know. This is... and that's why that first episode now seems important when he'd started adding this stuff to it. And I know we're only talking because that guy, Henschel, the composer, made records for Columbia, but it's amazing how you link off into this stuff. It's yeah.
Like you said, that Shelby Downer book about Bell being on Jekyll Island. I mean, yeah, all creepy, all matches together.
The Jekyll Island Club was a private club on Jekyll Island on Georgia's Atlantic coast. It was founded in 1886 when members of an incorporated hunting and recreation club. The club thrived through the early 20th century. Its members came from many of the world's wealthiest families, most notably Morgans, Rockefellers, and Vanderbilts. Jekyll Island was the location of the famous meeting in 1910, in which the draft legislation was written to create a central banking system for the United States. Following the panic of 1907, banking reform became a major issue in the US. Senator Nelson Aldrich was the guy that led it, and he's a relation of the Rockefellers as well, Aldrich. They were married to get intertwined with the Aldriches and the Rockefellers. The first telephone line across the United States participated from Jekyll Island.
Do you think why we've got the Jekyll and Hyde story, though?
No, Jekyll and Hyde comes from a British family called Jekyll.
Yeah, I've told me this before.
Yeah, and I was going to go into that, but it deserves more time spent on it than just a little snippet. But there's the family of Jekylls.
Yeah,
and Jekyll Island was called after one of them.
Right, okay. Yeah. So there is a link then.
Yeah, there is definitely a link. Yeah,
right.
There's two sets of families. One of them, the Jekyll story was based on, and the other side, the island was named after.
But why make a story up about, an evil version of
Robert Louis Stevenson, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Treasure Island guy. Yeah. Basically, a split person.
He wrote it about his friend.
I've read that book. Yeah,
it's only
a short story actually.
And one of the Jekylls, she was a famous gardener. Anyways, it went into some fact. We were talking about architecture being and Masonic side, and this guy who was her friend, who she introduced from landscape gardening. I forget her first name now. I wish I'd put it in now. She introduced this guy in who became Sir something or other, and he built all the famous buildings in India and a lot of them in London as well. On January 2015, Theodore N. Vail, the first president of AT&T, participated from Jekyll Island in the opening of the first telephone line across the United States. Which brings us back nicely to Alexander Bell, who co-founded AT&T in 1885. His trademark usage was acquired successively by the Volta Graphophone Company, then the American Graphophone Company, the North American Phonograph Company, and finally Columbia Phonograph Company, known today as Columbia Records. In March 1925, Louis Sterling, backed by J.P. Morgan, acquired controlling interest in the parent company Columbia US. The repercussions of the stock market crash of 1929, again backed by J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller / Rothschilds, led to huge losses in the recording industry. And in March 1931, J.P. Morgan, as a major shareholder, steered Columbia Graphophone Company, along with Odeon Records and Parlophone, which it owned since 1926, into a merger with the Graphophone Company, known as HMV, to form a company called Electrical Musical Industries Limited, or as we know it today, EMI.
Bloody hell.
Sir Isaac Schoenenberg, born 1880, died 1963, another 1963 death, was an electronics engineer born in Belarus and was best known for his role in the history of television. He was the head of EMI research that developed the 405 line on the Marconi-EMI system, the first fully electronic television system to be used in regular broadcasting when it was introduced with the BBC television service in 1936. It was later adopted by other TV organisations around the world. This is 1984 in full effect.
Just listening to that, Fatty, right? It does make you think, doesn't it? Right? And I'm going to talk crazy talk here. Crazy air talk, should I say. And then you think about the beginnings of TV and radio, etc. And then you think now where we are with tablets, flat screens, whatever. And then you've got all these names saying they invented these things. And like we were saying about a force behind all this stuff, was this information just given to someone to pass down to us? Because who invented the flat screen? Who invented the touch screen? Who invented the iPhone?
Yeah. There's no...
it wasn't Steve Jobs, was it?
There weren't Steve Jobs, no.
No.
They haven't had to pay licenses for them.
No.
You don't see Apple saying we made all this money, but a lot of it went back to the inventor
Samsung,
of the... Yeah.
And Samsung copied us, so we're going to sue them.
Yeah, but everyone's got the flat screen. Everyone's got it.
They just appeared. They appeared in 2009.
Yeah, they're not fighting over in court saying we invented that. No, we invented that. It was given to them by DARPA or someone like that from somewhere. Yeah. The take this DARPA. Take this Black Mirror.
He doesn't make it in the world of inventions. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, and it's one of them inventions, like electricity.
Yeah, and television, I suppose, to an extent, and
frequencies,
telephone,
controlling the frequencies.
I mean, they put Bell on the telephone thing, but really,
and he just happened to be called Bell.
Yeah, no, Bell End.
As head of research at EMI, Schoenenberg was a chap called Alan Blumenlein's supervisor when Blumenlein invented stereophonic sound in 1931. Blumenlein died. I'm probably going to get destroyed for pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, there you go. During World War II, on the 7th of June, 1942, age 38, during a secret trial of the H2S airborne radar system that was then under development. When all on board the Halifax bomber were killed when it crashed in Wales, or Welsh Bicknor in Herefordshire. Blumenlein was so central to development of the H2S airborne radar system to aid bomb targeting that after his death, many believed the project would fail. However, it survived and was the factor in shortening World War II. Here again, we see that people working for the military on secret electronic experiments, who then went on to head up the new communications equipment beaming frequencies under the guise of TV radio broadcasts into the homes of billions around the world. These were weapons of war at one point that were then aimed at us from places like the BBC.
Mm. Then you think about like Emily Moore Mast, don't you?
Yeah.
That Mast
Well,
just-
Emily Moore Mast and all them masts like that just remind me of Triffids. I don't know why. It just
Well, look at the Emily Moore Mast and the other masts that you see like that. Then look at the modern 5G towers that you see. They look very sinister. You're driving down the road, and I've pointed out to my missus, I'm like, look at that. Where the hell did that come from?
yeah, it just popped up overnight.
As a human being, you're driving down the road and you see one. You're like, my God, where did that come from? And
Yeah.
the solid, scary looking fucking.
They're putting them up overnight when people are asleep, Chris. In 1905, Sir Isaac Schoenberg was employed to design and install the earliest wireless stations in Russia.
Oh.
However, in 1914, Schoenberg decided to emigrate to London and join the Marconi Wireless and Telegraph Company. In 1919, he became a British subject. Just like that, just make him a British subject. He would probably have known a man called Peter Pendleton Eckersley, who was one of the founders of the BBC. Eckersley was a pioneer of British broadcasting. Eckersley was the first chief engineer of the British Broadcasting Company Limited from 1922 to 1927, and chief engineer of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, until 1929. In World War I, Eckersley was sent to the Wireless Experimental Station at Biggin Hill, where he conducted experimental work on duplex telephony for aircraft. He joined Marconi's Wireless Telegraph Company as the head of experimental section, aircraft department, the experimental section of the aircraft department, where he designed the Croydon Airport ground station transmitter. His elder brother was physicist Thomas Eckersley. Why do I mention Peter Pendleton Eckersley? Well, they were sons of a man called William Eckersley, a civil engineer. William Eckersley married a lady called Rachel Huxley. Rachel Huxley was the fifth child of Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley, which would make Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley and Sir Andrew Huxley direct first cousins of the man who helped set up the BBC.
It's all started to look like shenanigans.
Orwell also worked for the BBC.
That's a fact because I've seen that picture with that giant microphone that says BBC on top.
Yeah, we've seen pictures of it. In fact, on the 7th of November 2017, a statue of George Orwell was unveiled in the piazza of the BBC's new broadcasting house by Baroness Whittaker and Orwell's son, Richard Blair. So he's now got a statue in the BBC.
Right.
But there's no known recordings of him.
Have you seen that
video.
statue? I've never seen that statue.
No, I've never seen it. I've not seen it. George Orwell worked for the BBC during World War II, 1941 to 1943, as talks producer on what was then the Eastern Service, writing and programming what was essentially propaganda for broadcast to the Indian subcontinent at a crucial time during the war. That paragraph came from the Orwell Society website.
Right, so he was a propagandist, wasn't
No, he was a fantastic genius author
he?
that came out of nowhere. Yeah. Right. I want to go off into Mike Williams and Mark Devlin territory here. Right. I'm going into the Beatles. Right. This is a side note. This is a proper side swipe. However, it does bring us back. Right. It does bring us back.
Right.
The Beatles were signed to EMI. Yeah. My producer, George Martin, via EMI's Parlophone label. Listen to this George Martin story that I found out. I've not heard it before. Maybe someone will say, I knew about that, but I've not heard this before. And I introduced some more mind control and more proof of the controlling pattern that runs through the show and shenanigans that goes on, and more hooks the link if we needed any more. So George Martin, CB, was the Beatles' record producer, arranger, composer, conductor, and he was also a musician. That was from Wikipedia, that. Producer, arranger, composer, conductor, and he was a musician. Only thing
Even
he
I
didn't
knew
put
that,
there
and
was singer.
Even I know that I'm not a Beatles fan at all.
He basically did everything.
Mm.
Martin was commonly referred to as the fifth Beatle. There's a lot of them fifth Beatles. Martin used his Army Veterans Grant to attend the Guildhall School of Music and Drama from 1947 to 1950. He studied piano as his main instrument and oboe for his secondary, being interested in the music of Rachmaninoff, Ravel, and Cole Porter. In 1948, George Martin's oboe teacher was an upper-class lady called Margaret Elliott. Elliott was a professor of oboe at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Elliott was also an honorary member of the Royal Academy of Music. Margaret Augusta Elliott, Augusta's always, it must have been a popular name back then because I keep coming across a few names and Augusta's one of them, but anyway, in male and female. Margaret Augusta Elliott, to be exact, was born to the Honourable Edward Granville Elliott, a younger brother of the 7th and 8th Earls of Saint-Germain. Margaret Elliott's ancestors were the Earls of Saint-Germain, Marquess of Stafford, the Earls of Gower, Duke of Kingston upon Hull, Earl of Denbigh, Marquess of Dorchester, Edward Craggs Elliott, 1st Baron Elliott, Earl, and the Earls of Jersey, the Villiers family, who were also linked to the Jekyll family, and the Dukes of Buckingham, who was the favourite of King James I of England. Why is Margaret Elliott important and interesting? Well, not only did she teach oboe to the fifth Beatle, Sir George Martin, CBE, it turns out that on the 24th of July 1943, Margaret Elliott married Dr. Richard Asher.
Ah, is that the Paul McCartney's Mrs.'s dad? Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Richard Asher was the eminent British consultant in blood and mental diseases at the Central Middlesex Hospital, as well as being a broadcaster and an author of notable medical articles. Asher was the senior physician responsible for the mental observation ward. He described and named Munchausen syndrome in a 1951 article in The Lancet.
Oh, hang on a minute. Sorry, did he come up with a Munchausen? Did he come up with Munchausen?
Yes.
Fucking hell, which means you basically, that's Munchausen means you can't help but lie.
Yes.
And I've looked into that because
You're gonna like this.
You know when you meet loads of liars, and that is where Terry Gilliam made a film about it, the Munchausen, whatever. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
Munchausen syndrome is a factitious disorder in which those affected feign or induce disease, illness, injury, abuse, or psychological trauma to draw attention, sympathy, or reassurance to themselves.
All right, I kind of thought it was just that you were a liar, but I
Well, it basically is.
But that makes it a little bit deeper, though, doesn't it?
The difference between hypochondriacs is that people with Munchausen syndrome are skilled in deceiving medical professionals.
Right. Oh.
While people with hypochondria may be resistant to reassurance and may continue to worry about their health despite medical reassurance. Now, why would this be important for Brave New World Order? The Ashers had 3 children. Peter Asher, born 1944, member of the pop duo Peter and Gordon, and later became a record producer. Also, there's Claire Asher, a radio actress. I think she's an author as well. And the middle daughter was Jane Asher, born 1946, the film and TV actress and novelist. The Asher's family own a home above Peter Asher's private consulting rooms at 57 Wimpole Street, London. Where this story becomes a little odder is that, as Chris said, Paul McCartney lived there from 1964 to 1966 at the height of Beatlemania during his relationship with Jane Asher. Now, what are the odds that Sir George Fifth Beatle Martin would be taught oboe in 1947 to 49 by Jane Asher's mother at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and then go on to be the manager of Paul McCartney's Beatles band?
Yeah, sorry if I shouldn't have mentioned that earlier on, but yeah.
Dr. Asher's 1949 paper, Myodexodermus Madness, I'm not even going to trade it, and
what the hell
Psychosis.
does that mean? What does myodexodermus mean?
dermatus madness or myxodermatus psychosis, a condition in where the thyroid gland does not produce enough thyroid hormones.
Right.
Another modern day autoimmune disease issue. Yeah. So what they're saying is because your thyroid hormones aren't being produced, that you can actually get, and this is true, it can affect your mood. Yeah?
Right.
On February 11th, 1956, Peter Asher published a paper called Respectable Hypnosis. In the paper, under the heading The State of Hypnosis. You tell me if this sounds like MKUltra / Manchurian Candidate programming. It reads, under deep hypnosis, the subject automatically obeys any suggestions made by the hypnotist. For instance, if you suggest that he cannot move, he is virtually paralyzed. But if you suggest that he can move, then he does. If you suggest that he will obey your requests, then others can command him in vain. But if you suggest that he will obey other people, then he will be obedient to them. Those phenomena which can be induced under deep hypnosis include paralysis, rigidity, anesthesia, automatic obedience, delusions, somnambulistic, which is trance, post-hypnotic suggestion, and post-hypnotic amnesia. Somnambulistic trance is where a person will walk, talk, or do complex actions while asleep. Under hypnosis, a patient can be requested to open his eyes, walk about, talk, and in fact behave like a normal conscious person. On waking from this trance, he will have no recollection of anything he has said or done.
Yeah,
this was from a 1956 paper that Peter Asher read. It's on the National Institutes of Health National Library of Medicine at PubMed. That's a snippet from it.
That sounds suspiciously like mind control.
Again, what are the odds that Sir George Martin, who has 3 Beatles on his coat of arms, was taught oboe by Margaret Elliott Asher, and then Martin would go on to produce, manage Sir Paul McCartney and the Beatles while he was going out with Jane Asher, and Peter Asher studied mind control via hypnosis and had Paul McCartney living with him for 2 years.
Yeah.
By the way, in the early 1960s, probably while living at the Asher home, Margaret Elliott also told Paul McCartney to play the recorder, which he later used to effect in the recording of a few of his songs, including The Foot on the Hill. According to McCartney, the song possibly, so he can't remember, relates to a character such as the Maharishi yogi, who we mentioned in episode 2, Twilight Language, the Beatles' meditation teacher. In 1964, Richard Asher suddenly gave up his job at the hospital and perhaps all his medical activities. This was the same period of time that Paul McCartney lived there in a relationship with Jane.
Weird, man. That's so weird, isn't it?
While living here with his then 18-year-old girlfriend, Jane Asher, Paul wrote many of the Beatles' most famous songs, including the first American #1, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was conceived in the basement of Jane's mother's music room. Yesterday was also written there on the family piano or in a box room at the top of the house, depends on who's telling the story. Paul said it's a famous story, innit? He famously woke up from a dream with a tune in his head and wrote it down and then asked anybody if they'd ever heard it before.
Yeah.
But I think Mike Williams showed that in that fantastic 4-hour marathon that he did about 3 years ago. And in what would it call? Did the Beatles write all their own music? Back a presentation from April 2020. Was Dr. Asher part of Tavistock MKUltra operation? I mean, we'll never know because Dr. Richard Asher suffered from depression himself in later life. Well, not just later life, a few years on, and reportedly died by suicide on 25th of April 1969, aged just 57. His death took place at the same place, 57 Wimpole Street, the home he shared with Sir James Paul McCartney, MBE, approximately 3 years after McCartney lived there. Did Dr. Asher suffer from the same kind of mental illness that Dr. Ewan Cameron's MKUltra experiments were proving? Cameron argued that people with mental illnesses could spread and transmit their diseases.
Right? Fucking hell, what?
Yeah. He called it mental contagion.
We've seen a bit of that, I suppose, recently.
Yeah. Or did he know too much about the 1966 death of Paul Mark I? Was this the reprogramming of new Paul?
Yeah. I would guess, I mean, I'm making this up because I don't know, but it looks like his missus was brought in to drag in Paul Mark I and then, yeah, MK Ultra. And what a bizarre story, that is bizarre.
Yeah. And the reason I got into that, because many of the characters are attached to these. I mean, that Peter Asher could have just been easily knocked off, couldn't it? For all we know. But many of the characters attached to Huxley's that we're covering throughout this series and beyond are members of the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
And would it be right in saying that Asher went missing and they didn't find him, and then they found him in the basement?
And they found him in the bathroom, as usual, I think. But I might be wrong there.
But I think one of the stories was he went missing. They didn't find, and then they found him in his own house.
Okay, right. Because you do. That's what happens. You go missing. They can't find you anywhere. Then you're in your own house.
I think so. Anyway, sorry.
But anyway, whatever. It's an odd story.
It's a bizarro story, and like you said, you've just added to Mike Williams' already bizarro story with a bit of mob, the trombone.
Yeah. I hope he listens to that bit, because I hope he likes that bit, because these little things get you going. I don't want to do me. I'm a bit of a geek now, sadly, a train spotter, but they do get you. But that just the laws of possibility of Jane Asher's mum before she was Jane Asher's mum teaching Sir George Martin. It's 15 years, 20 years before he was the Beatles.
If you took everything you've mentioned in the last half an hour, right, and said they all lived in the same village, it'd kind of be all right.
Yeah.
But they don't, do they?
No. And not only that, it's not even the same time zone.
Yeah, exactly. But if they all lived on the same street at the same time, then it kind of might balance out, but it didn't work like that, does it?
No, it doesn't. All right, just to finish up on this little section about, I suppose, the Beatles, which I never envisaged me doing anything about the Beatles or JFK or Lee Harvey Oswald, for that matter, to be fair. But I can see a spin-off episode of Lee Harvey Oswald and JFK as well, which freaks me out doing, because I know a lot of people have done it. And I won't actually do it unless there's something we can do different to what people have. I'm just not going to go over the same stuff that people have done about an umbrella in Dealey Plaza and all that type of stuff. But a bit like that story with that guy in one of the other episodes we did, where he'd written a book about Oswald prior to Oswald doing that. And same with this. This is the same sort of thing. And what I suppose what I'm doing when I research is picking up little bits, not that have been missed, because that's unfair on the people that are doing research, because they've done some fantastic research, but little drops that have been left, little crumbs, and then going with it type of thing. But anyway.
Again, with the JFK thing, it's quite obvious it was put there as a conspiracy theory, maybe to get people focusing all their energy on something that everyone, you know what I mean? It was one of them,
I do know what you mean,
where it split everything and got everyone, I suppose, very early on arguing about details.
Well, you would say it was the first conspiracy operation, wasn't it?
It's a good way of putting it. An operation.
Yeah, because it's the first time that people actually thought, well, that's not right. Up to that point, that line in the sand, especially in America, it was all, we believe in the system, we're all Americans, and waving all that type of thing. And the same over here, probably
King and Country
and all that type of stuff. And this actually questioned the whole system, the system that you believed in for all them years, and actually killed your president.
So as well as the killing of the king thing, you've got also, it's attracting all the people who would be conspiracy theorists to focus all their energy on this one subject. Even
to the point of today, a 53-year-old bloke in Halifax who sort of read lots of books on JFK. It probably started me off on this angle, really, or one of the things.
I would say it was
now
actually
finding crumbs that are left, and I'm sure other people are as well. And that, I'm not saying I first to find that. I'm just saying that's
just another.
That's quite an obvious find, isn't it?
It's just another thread, isn't it?
Yeah, but like a lot of these things that are obvious, they're that obvious that we all miss them. A bit like George Martin's oboe teacher, the doctor whose daughter lived with them and were going out with Paul McCartney, and he just happened to be a mind control expert.
As soon as anyone puts anything out into the world, especially now with the internet, someone else is going to take it a bit further, aren't they?
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
Oh, you know.
And just by having this type of conversation,
yeah, someone might go, hang on a minute, that makes me think about this.
Exactly. And that's what this is all about. This isn't all about. One thing I will say: most of the people I've met in this genre since we started doing this, none of them are like chasing. We were talking about this earlier. The fame game. Somebody posed an interesting question the other day in a comment that said, "All these genetic bloodlines. It's all right saying they're all linked to royalty, but we could go through a lot of people, average people, and they'd all be linked to royalty as well," which is a good point. You go through with their DNA. One thing I would say, and I'm not saying I've got this 100% right, but things are materializing out of this ether that we're looking into and putting bloodline stroke, careers stroke, everything else into order, if you like. One thing I've noticed with the bloodlines with these guys and these people that we're doing is that they've got direct links. I remember we were doing some research a few weeks ago on Orwell's mother's genealogy, the Limousine family, which we'll come to in the next part of this Mockingbird. Orwell's second wife, who we're going to talk about in this episode, in a bit, she was Sonia Brownell, and she married after Orwell died a guy who was linked to the aristocracy, and she had no direct links to the aristocracy, and Orwell had no direct link other than being her dead husband to the aristocracy from that angle. Yeah, but he was linked to royalty. But on a genealogy page, it said that his mother, via George Orwell, via his wife Sonia, via her second husband, this guy we're going to talk about in a bit, had a direct link to royalty. Well, that's not true. And so, what I'm trying to say is one thing that we, because it's not a blood link. That it's not a direct link. It's ex-husband of some. That is not a direct link to royalty. Yeah. You can't say that means that they're some kind of chosen relative. One. Yeah. And what you generally see is a direct line back to a royal family, not my uncle's auntie, nephew married Baron such and such.
Well, an easy way to test it is to just do it on some random folk that you know. Yourself.
Well, I have been, and I don't find that. That's what I'm trying to say. And not all these stars have that lineage either. So not everybody's got that direct link back.
Yeah.
So some people are put there at the front. Ed Sheeran might be one. Russell Brand might be another one, to sort of deflect away from all this. The Damien Prometheus line, let's just call it. That you anyway, we're going around the houses there. But many of these characters attached to the Huxleys that we're covering throughout this series and beyond are members who were on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album.
Right.
And I've not really looked at that in any angle, because I'm not a Beatles fan, like I'm not a Rolling Stones or a Doors fan. But I know, like, Aldous Huxley being one, Aleister Crowley, occultist, Lewis Carroll, occultist, H.G. Wells, who was mentored by Aldous Huxley's father, and he mentored Aldous Huxley. George Bernard Shaw, who was a Fabian. The Peace family were founders, and the Huxleys are linked to them. He did say, though, George Bernard Shaw, I'm looking into him, it might be somebody we cover a little bit. He did say that jib jabs were a particularly filthy piece of witchcraft when he was talking about the smallpox witchcraft.
Right, really?
Jib jabs, yeah. Going back in the day.
I can't say I know anything about Josh.
No, I can't. But I don't know anything about any of these people.
I know his name. I know his name. But I don't know who he is.
What I would say is, other than names, I don't know anything. I know as much as you guys listening. In fact, you probably know more about them than I do, the listeners. And Chris, I only know about them from researching. And I heard somebody say about research, once I've done this research, and somebody asks me a question about it, I probably forget most of it because there's that much detail.
What is interesting about that Beatles album is these people are quite obscure, aren't they? What I mean is they're a strange group for a bunch of lads from Liverpool to have on an album cover. Slightly obscure, strange group of folk they've got.
Well, if they had gone to Oxford or Cambridge or places like that, they'd have been taught about these people, or maybe taught by them.
Well, you'd understand it more.
Yeah, you would. You would understand it more, but not some we call them uneducated scousers,
working class Liverpudlian guys, as we would be.
And how would you pick that information up? Right, you started out
20-odd-year-old.
You were 20-year-old when they first made it big, and this album was in 1967, so you're talking mid-20s.
So Paul McCartney and John Lennon have always had an interest in Aldous Huxley and his witchcraft
and ancient Italian music, Neapolitan music. Yeah, I
mean, chances are they might have heard of Lewis Carroll, but I mean, because you only start learning about that stuff, especially if you're a working class fella. You start to self-educate yourself maybe in your 18s, 60, you know what I mean? You could have learned about it at school, fair enough, but you start to self-educate yourself a little bit. So then they've got, 2 years, 3 years to learn about these.
While they're writing hundreds of different songs and recording studios on tour, signing
taking loads of drugs, doing loads of
getting MBEs,
touring. Yeah. Busy guys.
Busy guys.
While learning to play the guitar and instruments better than anyone else on the planet.
And the recorder. And the sitar. Busy lads.
Prodigies.
One thing Bernard Shaw did say, apart from the anti-jib jab for smallpox, he said, in the Fabians War Manifesto, Fabianism and the Empire, written in 1900, Shaw declared that until the federation of the world becomes an accomplished fact, we must accept that most responsible imperial federations available are a substitute for it.
Right. So he's on about the one world order there, isn't he?
He's on about New World Order, brave New World Order. There, in one sentence. Also, Lewis Carroll, Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, we're going to come on to in a future episode, author of Alice in Wonderland series, which were he released the first book in 1865, took pictures of Aldous Huxley's mother, Julia Arnold, and her sister Ethel when they were young girls. Lewis has been rumoured to have had a liking for young girls, and a lot of the people that were taking pictures of stopped the children actually allowing him to take pictures of them. But yeah, so these are people that are on the album cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
But again, you're a young author, right? Lewis Carroll. Changing name to Carroll, which is weird. And then, but also, if you were a young author and you're going to make a hero, would you really choose a young girl? I mean, I know you can do, and there's nothing wrong with it, but would that be your go-to person to be the hero of your?
Not at that time. You'd have thought it'd have been a bloke, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
a swashbuckling type character.
Exactly. Even
in
a
the
young
1860s,
and you're a man writing it, so you'd think it'd be a little boy, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
not a little girl.
Yeah, but it shows how far back this control actually started, doesn't it?
And why are we still wanging on about Alice in Wonderland? I mean, it's good, whatever, but
it's not amazing.
It's just another one of them things. There's a lot of these things, isn't there? Like Peter Pan. Peter Pan. I mean, you've got Pan. A lot of these things, Dracula. I mean, all right, they're interesting. Frankenstein. But they're there for a reason, aren't they? They're there for a reason because since then, has there been no other stories invented? I mean, there's tons of stories, and often weaker versions of them as well.
So just on a side note about Jane Asher and a few other bits of stuff about that story. Another interesting slight diversion is, let's go back to the Jane Asher story for a minute. Jane Asher also had links to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, which again is interesting given the idea that Alice in Wonderland has been linked with MK Ultra. And also, if you put in the mix that Jane Asher's father, Dr. Peter Asher, and his history with mental institutions, he was an expert in mental diseases, if we just do a recap here, and studied hypnosis that we mentioned earlier, where he had something published on PubMed, or the National Institutes of Health, which sounded very much like MK Ultra. And then throw into the mix, he also had Paul McCartney there, who wrote songs while he was there and couldn't remember how he wrote them.
And he was found dead in his basement.
And Peter Asher was found dead in his basement. And yeah, it's an interesting mix. Anyway, Jane Asher was a child actress, and we also see that a lot with this MK Ultra type thing, don't they? With these child proteges type thing.
Yeah.
She played the title role in a dramatized version or dramatized versions of Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass in 1958 for Argo Records, aged 11. What other age could it be? But I think they were like recordings more than some sort of acting.
Radio, like radio recordings.
Like that type of thing. And in 1985, Jane Asher also played Alice's mother in the Dennis Potter film Dream Child.
Right. He was around a lot, wasn't he, in the 80s, Dennis Potter?
Yeah. Yeah. Did he do a lot of those working class type things?
I think he did.
More thriller-based, Chris?
I don't know. I'm out looking. Is that the guy who did Singing Detective? Do you remember that? Was that him? Was that him?
Yeah, that were him. Yeah, came across that. But listen to this. Dennis Potter, an English television dramatist, screenwriter and journalist, between 1953 and 1955, on his national service, he was in the intelligence corps in the British Army,
Right.
where he learnt Russian, because that's what everybody does. He learned Russian in 2 years.
Yeah, that'll come in handy when he's making films.
That'll come in handy when he's making films. At the Joint Services School of Linguists.
Right.
Throughout the Cold War, intelligence corps officers and NCOs were posted behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany to join the intelligence gathering activities of the British Commanders-in-Chief mission to the Soviet forces in Germany. The Intelligence Corps, or INT Corps, is a corps of the British Army. It is responsible for gathering, analysing and disseminating military intelligence and also for counterintelligence and security.
Interesting.
Counterintelligence is basically tasked with the spread of disinformation, otherwise known as lies.
Bullshit.
Yes. What have we got now on the BBC Verify?
Yeah. Yeah.
A disinformation expert, Chris. Springer sprung. Offensive counterintelligence is having identified an opponent's efforts against the system and trying to manipulate these attacks by either turning the opponent's agents into double agents or feeding them false information to report. We don't see any of that, do we, at BBC? Potter also worked for the BBC. Where else, Chris?
Interesting to watch what he produced now. Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Yeah, well,
his name was bandied around a lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Dennis Potter presents The Singing Detective, and that got...
Right.
I don't know how good it'd be now, but you don't see it repeated or anything, though, do you?
No, but it'd be interesting to see what's actually hidden
what's
in
it
now.
What's in it now? Yeah. I mean, do you remember it was, who is it? That actor, I forgot his name. And he was burnt when he was just lying in a bed. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember that.
I remember because it freaked me out because it was a burnt guy lying in a bed, but I can't remember the story.
Right. Interesting, isn't it? Jane Asher, that is, accompanied the Beatles and their respective partners to Rishikesh in India in 1968 to attend an advanced transcendental meditation training session with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. In 1968, the Maharishi announced that he would stop his public activities and begin the training of transcendental meditation teachers at his new global headquarters in Seelisberg, Switzerland. Remember, we mentioned this in one of the other ones.
Yeah.
The transcendental meditation movement are programs and organizations that promote the transcendental meditation techniques founded by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in India in the 50s. The organization was estimated to have 900,000 participants in 1977. I think it's over 5 million now. And it's estimated to be worth $3.5 billion.
Not bad
all for meditation.
Not bad for a yoga guy. how many gowns can you buy with that?
I mean, we did mention that. You have to buy a lot of flowers to make some chains and stuff like that, daisy chains, and what have you. The transcendental movement has been called a spiritual movement, a new religious movement, a millennium movement, a world-affirming movement, a new social movement, a guru-centered movement, and a personal growth movement. What about New World Order?
It's a funny thing, though, isn't it? The what call it? I mean, I know all religion, because I know some religious people say you shouldn't meditate. But there can't possibly be anything wrong with meditating sitting quietly over a problem.
I've got a lot of benefit from meditating, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, but you do it naturally, don't you? People do it naturally just by sitting still. And you know, when you go into a gormless stare like kids do and you get told to snap out of it or anything, that's literally, I would hazard a guess, some form of meditation. Yeah, daydreaming, which you get told off for. But why would it turn into a psyop? Why would the transcendental meditation movement become a psyop?
If you're meditating, it's a type of hypnosis, if you like. How better to put Twilight language and other forms of mind control into you without even knowing. There are benefits of meditation. I ain't rubbishing meditation here.
Oh no, you're not. Yeah, no, I'm asking. I'm just wondering.
I've got massive benefits from meditation when I were ill.
You don't ever hear anyone saying they get negative benefits, but why would they hijack it though? That's what I'm saying. The New Age movement is dodgy. There's not a doubt, but there is also a lot of truth in it as well. So,
well, isn't that how they get you? There's a lot of truth in most of this stuff. However, what they do is sabotage it and make it harmful or controlling, don't they? Interestingly, another seemingly organic movement that seems to have been constructed into something different, like we've just been saying, isn't it, from the start? And if you don't think it was, just hear this. Interestingly, another weird twist: KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov. Here's a picture of him now meeting the yogi of Yuri and Yogi, meeting up with the same guy that was a spiritual advisor to the Beatles. Bezmenov met him while stationed in India. Bezmenov said that the KGB was interested in Mahesh. His journalistic duties, that's Yuri Bezmenov's, was to help gather information and to spread disinformation to foreign countries for the purposes of Soviet propaganda and subversion in India, similar to BBC Verify and the military intelligence corps that Dennis Potter worked for. It's exactly the same principle. He got rapid promotion, and Bezmenov was once again assigned to Bila in 1969 in India, this time as a Soviet press officer and public relations agent for the KGB. You need one of them. You need a PR agent for KGB. We're not using welding torches now. We're just using vices. So, yeah, you need a PR agent. He continued Novosti's propaganda efforts in New Delhi, working in the Soviet embassy. Bezmenov was directed to slowly establish a Soviet sphere of influence in India.
Just quickly, Dom, we should just reiterate who Bezmenov is, because some people might not know. He's the one who we always quote of saying, "We want." He was a Soviet agent, KGB agent,
a defector,
defected to America. But he said when he was in the Soviet, because we always quote that, don't we? That he said they wanted the public so brainwashed that you could lead them up to a concentration camp, say that's a concentration camp, and they would deny it was there. So we've used that.
That'll never happen.
We've used that quote loads of times due to the previous 3 years nonsense. And Lance said they wouldn't just say that now; they'd say, "What have you got? Wi-Fi password?" So that's where we got that quote from, that Bezmenov quote. And I've watched that video where I think you've got it on sheet. I think it's on Sheetfile. Yeah, where he talks about defecting, and it was this point when he defected, then wasn't it?
Yes.
Where he was in India, and he disguises. Yeah. Anyway, go on, sorry.
Yeah. In the same year, a secret directive of the Central Committee opened a new secret department in all the Soviet Union embassies around the world entitled the Research and Counter-Propaganda Group, or the BBC. Bezmenov became a deputy chief of that department, gathering intelligence from sources like Indian informers and agents or influential and or political significant citizens of India. Is that what the controllers were doing, subverting the Indian gurus via bands like the Beatles and all the other ones that were there, the Stones, etc., to influence popular culture by using hypnotic twilight language in popular culture while taking mind-bending drugs like LSD, and therefore in what Bezmenov called the Soviet subversion model, which basically destroyed Western culture. But as we know, everything's connected. So was this all part of one massive plan to destroy Western culture via the so-called enemy, the Soviets? Bezmenov defected from the Russian diplomatic services, KGB, by dressing as a hippie in 1970. And he defected via the CIA and the Americans to Canada, where he lived for most of his life. I think he got married there. And this isn't really about Bezmenov, but what I found interesting here is that one, he's meeting the same people that the Beatles are meeting at the same time. The KGB are infiltrating the gurus that are infiltrating Western popular music.
Kind of makes you think that maybe possibly they're in cahoots.
Yeah, well, I think
at some level, not his level, but maybe at a higher level, you know, they were in cahoots.
Yes, 100%.
I'd recommend anyone to go and watch some of those Yuri Bezmenov interviews. Are really interesting.
Yeah, they are. I'm going to show you.
I mean, if you compare them to what's gone on recently, and
so I mean, he defected dressed as a hippie as well, right at the end of the hippie generation in 1970, and the Beatles album, just wind back a bit to 1963, with the Beatles was released on the same day JFK was apparently shot, and C.S. Lewis and Aldous Huxley died.
Right, big day.
Big day.
Big day for the cult.
Yeah. I'll just read a couple of quotes from Bezmenov. So he spoke about the 4 stages of ideological subversion. And if you watch his interview, he speaks very matter-of-factly. He knows this is
a good
happening.
talk. It's quite funny as well.
Yeah, very funny. Yeah, but very serious and very scary. Stage 1 is demoralization. Educate an entire generation into Marxist ideology. Now, if you just take the Marxist part out, it could say any ideology you want.
LGBTQ springs to
whatever. Yes. Yeah.
Global climate warming change.
Yeah. Destabilization is number 2. And that can be done via the economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. Then we head into crisis is number 3. Violent change of power, structure, and economy. And then normalization, a period of stability until the next cycle reaches a crisis point.
I mean, you could, with a little bit of word changing, you could put that into 3 or 4 different things going on right now, couldn't you?
Well, I mean, we're still in crisis at the minute. The violent change of power was done in 2020. And now we're in the economy part.
Yeah.
In part 3. So we're still not in normal. With people think it's normalization because we were locked up and you can walk around, but it's not normalization.
But then in each one of them, there's a micro version of that.
Yeah, exactly. You could drill down and drill down and drill down into.
So we've had normalization, but not really. If you know what I mean.
Well, you could go granular on all them, details. So another of his phrases is, and we'll think about the BBC in the back of his mind here, because we're sort of talking about that type of group. You could call CNN and all the other type things as well. Yeah. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in the country of your enemy until such time that the perception of reality of your enemy is screwed up to such an extent that he does not perceive you as an enemy. You can take your enemy without a single shot being fired.
Yeah, and if you think, if we've been the enemy over the last few years, that's literally what's happened, isn't it? If the state's our enemy and we're their enemy, then they have literally subverted us without firing a bullet.
Yes, yeah. Everything he said has happened.
A different kind of shot.
Yeah, just a different kind of shot. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on because we've got a bit to go through.
I'm wanging on.
I know we're both wanging on. It's all interesting information. I quite like talking like this as a sideline to this series. On the 5th of October, 1926, the Columbia Graphophone Company acquired Parlophone, owned and backed by J.P. Morgan and Co., who in turn were backed by the Rothschild family. Interestingly, EMI, just to follow on from the EMI thing, was acquired by Terra Firma Capital Partners in 2007. The founder and chairman of Terra Firma Capital Partners, one of the largest private equity firms in Europe, is a person called Guy Hans, an English financer and investor. Hans served as chairman prior to the 2007 takeover as well. While at Oxford, Hans became firm friends with Baron William Hague, who in 1984 was his best man at his wedding. In 2000, Guy Hans was elected as a global leader of tomorrow of the World Economic Forum. Were these early pioneers in telecoms like Peter Eckersley, who was a cousin of Aldous Huxley, and all these people we've mentioned in TV, film, radio, and music using hypnotic frequencies to hypnotize the populations, just like similar thing to the Indian gurus we talked about earlier that were used in the Doors and Beatles music in episode 2, Twilight Language, many of these were also authors and journalists and academics. Is doing chicken impressions on a stage any different from banging pots and pans with wooden spoons on a doorstep by hypnotized zombies in March 2020? Is there a lot of difference in that? Who then went on to be hypnotized into having a 3-dart finish?
Yeah.
En masse.
Yeah.
En masse. Is that any different from the Beatles screaming girls?
No. I mean, would you say that maybe that technology or whatever it is they used was developed and heightened for now?
Well, like all the MK Ultra stuff we've discussed, like all the things there, that it's like they've finessed that, electrocuting a guy's brain and sending him out to do some like Saran for argument's sake.
And then adding to it the technology of the 4K TVs and the phones and screen mirror, all this stuff.
Well, it's strange that they discussed it as wireless. I mean, when you say I'm listening to the wireless I don't know if anybody talks about it like that. In Yorkshire, that with the radio, people still say it wireless now because it's got no wire attached to it. It's an aerial and an antenna. But Wi-Fi is the same thing. It's no different. It's still wireless technology. So they were messing around with wireless technology. Did they know things that could do prior to using Wi-Fi, for argument's sake, en masse? And bear in mind that Wi-Fi uses the zeros and ones, the matrix code, if you like.
Antennized. Always looked antennized, but even going beyond the ones that you saw when phones first came out, now they look. I mean, they're
scary,
big and scary, chunky things with a radiation sign at the bottom as well. If you notice, it's got like that the yellow.
But it's all right. That's if you stand at the bottom of it, though.
Right. All right. So you're right.
If you're directly across from it and your bathroom's there and you're having a bath getting fried at the same time, that's all right. I mean, also there are always the corporations in the mix too, dead entities. In this case, Columbia Records, EMI, AT&T, General Electric Company, all owned and funded by the same JP Morgan, etc., etc., etc. And so it goes on. It keeps going on and keeps going on. And I mean, for me, it's just too much of a coincidence that you can't tell me that these people, I'll use JP Morgan as an example. When you sit in a boardroom, and I've been in quite a few, you make plans for 3 years or whatever. We run a small business, or did do, and you make plans for 3 or 5 years. You don't make plans for 10 or 25 years or 100 years, because we haven't got the finances or the world-changing finances to change these events.
But if you're even McDonald's, you plan to get the customer from birth to death.
Yes. Are you telling me that all this veganism and all this global climate warming, sunniest day, wettest day drought syndrome, that all these things in the mix, all this transhumanism, that McDonald's haven't planned 100 years in advance, where they're not actually having hamburgers anymore? It's something like flea burgers or something.
Yeah. They'll be already fit. Yeah, because I mean, they made a vegan burger pretty quick.
Yeah,
everything. I mean, all this stuff. You do feel, don't you, that all this stuff is just happening all at once now, and it's all reaching up to a climatic event.
It's that and it's that blatantly obvious that it becomes a mire of obviousness, if you like. That it's so blatantly obvious now. I mean, just over the last week or so, they started coming out and saying, "Oh, we made a mistake. We overreacted with lockdowns." And I know we're talking about something slightly different, but we overreact. But people like who had podcasts like us, Rise Above Lads, Devlin, Bajerski, all these people were saying all these things. Richard Dial, Crow, Mike Williams,
and also anyone listening to this probably thought, "Well, that's bollocks."
Yes.
But so now what they're saying that everyone thought who's probably listening to this 3 years ago, and I'm saying, "Oh, it was true."
But they're adding a mix to it, saying we were inept, or that type.
I told you that. I said that right.
I know. That's what I'm trying to say.
They'll come out with it. I mean, the best thing they can make you think is that they're slightly inept.
Yeah, they're inept, and there's somebody better coming in.
But it's a double whammy for them, because that makes people feel who read newspapers and go along with politics. It makes them feel superior to the inferior politicians.
Think that their
I would have done that. I would have done that. It's like that old chestnut of.
And do you know what? Keir Starmer will do that for me. So
someone sat on a sofa saying that football manager, what I'd have done is this, what I'd have done is that. Well, you're not doing anything, are you?
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And what's going to change? Oh, if we sign this player for £100 million, he's going to change my life.
Guess what? Next year he'll still be playing.
And not only that, your tickets have gone up because you've signed him, you dickhead. Anyway, let's crack on. Eileen O'Shaughnessy. We're popping in and out here. Let's get back on track. Orwell married O'Shaughnessy on the 9th of June, 1936. They tried to have children, but Eileen could not become pregnant. They learned later that Orwell was sterile. Eileen joined her husband in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. While there, she had a relationship with a man called George's Cop, who was Orwell's commander in the British Volunteers. Apparently, Eileen and Orwell had an open marriage. Another thing, as I keep mentioning throughout, has been the theme that in this research of open infidelity between, which again leads me to two things. One, it says to me, are a lot of these people either gay and they're not bothered, or is it a security operation that says, right, you're going to look married, but you're not really married. We're going to give you this act that you're married, but you can sleep with them to get information, and you can sleep with him to get information. But anyway,
or do they just live in a different world?
Do they just live in a different world? Yeah. In October 1936, so Orwell went to fight in the Spanish Civil War with the communists against the fascists. And I'm not going to go into a lot of this because I could have gone down a deep hole with this stuff. And so if you think I've missed something out, I've purposely not gone into a lot of detail in this. Cop, this is George's Cop, crossed the border from France, an interesting character this, into Spain, and volunteered as an officer for the Republicans by joining POUM, P-O-U-M, the POUM militia column. Cop is another interesting character. A lot of these communists were of different factions, Trotskyites, Leninists, Stalinists. And because Stalin were in power, Chris, if you had a Leninist view, even though you were fighting in Spain for the Spanish communists, the Russians or the USSR were funding that against Nazi Germany, who were funding the fascists.
Right.
They would arrest you, so they'd arrest their own side and throw them in a gulag or shoot them for questioning what the communists were doing. This is how nuts it apparently it was. And during the Spanish Civil War, the Stalinists ordered purges on their own men, jailing, torturing, and killing some of them. Orwell apparently was of a different faction, and he thought that they were after him. Anyway, right. In 1937, Orwell returned to the trenches and was shot through the throat by a sniper's bullet, ending his participation in the war. Cop was on hand to help his friend. So they're still friends, even though he's seen his wife.
Right. Bloody weird.
Yeah. In February 1944, Cop moved, interesting name, Cop, moved to a flat in Canonbury Square, and the following month he married a lady called Doreen Hunton. A few months later, Orwell and Eileen also moved to Canonbury Square, a few doors down from the Cops, and their newly adopted son, Richard, now Richard Blair. Doreen had their first child in February 1945, but the family was shattered a few weeks later when Eileen, who had taken Richard to stay at the Hunton family home in County Durham, tragically died. We'll come to that in a bit. After the funeral, Orwell brought back his son to Canonbury Square to stay with the Cops until he could arrange for a full-time nurse and return to Europe. So his wife died. His adopted son, who I think was 2-year-old at that time, he left them with this George Cop who had an affair with his wife, and then went to Europe on a journalist mission after the war.
Right.
And we'll come to that in a bit as well. So George was an interesting character of Ashkenazi descent. It seemed he worked for the French intelligence and British intelligence in Vichy, France during World War II. MI5, who had been monitoring his activities, decided to use his network on the recommendations of Major Sir Anthony Blunt, who became Cop's controller. Now, if you remember Anthony Blunt was the guy who was a double agent. He was spying for Russia as well.
Right.
And he comes in and out of this story a lot. By June 1943, Cop had created a new cover role as a consulting engineer for the Vichy Ministry of Industrial Production. He was sort of an inventor as well, this Cop, as well as being a communist war fighter. He was an inventor, allowing him to increase his network of operatives further. In effect, Cop was a double agent from that moment. Major Sir Anthony Blunt was caught in the 1950s as a double agent working for the Soviets. In 1943, Kopp escaped France and the Gestapo moved in with O'Shaughnessy in the UK, or the O'Shaughnessy's. I think it was her sister-in-law,
Right.
her brother's husband. In January 1950, Orwell died. 2 months later, Kopp, who was an engineer and inventor, moved his family to France, bolstered by promises from potential investors in his designs. Kopp suddenly died in 1951, a year later. There remains no trace of his grave.
Vaporized. What happened to him?
Adios. The Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, also known as POUM, P-O-U-M. POUM was formed in 1935 as a communist opposition to the Stalinist form of communism promoted by the Soviet Union. British author George Orwell fought alongside members of the Independent Labour Party as part of POUM militias. He recounted his experience in his book, Homage to Catalonia. It is a well-known fact that the British intelligence and US intelligence infiltrated all these communist groups. I mean, that it's sort of without doubt that it's not Britain's going over there to fight for communism at the height of the mid-1930s. They're going to get watched, funded probably as well. The Spanish Civil War fought between 36 and 39 between the Republicans and the Nationalists. Miles Mathis wrote a fantastic piece called George Orwell Faked His Death, made a great point about Orwell. And this is what he said. I also remind you of a big contradiction in the story. Orwell was already supposed to have lung problems in the late 30s. What kept him out of the Second World War when it started? He was allegedly in and out of hospitals and sanitariums by 1935, and yet he had no problem being okayed for action in the Spanish Civil War. How does that make sense, especially seeing that he arrived in Spain in the middle of winter and was sent into the mountains? So just to add a bit in here about Mensa, that then links all the way back round again. So it's quite an interesting mix again, how all these things are intertwined. So just the meaning of Mensa, M-E-N, men, is a reference to the moon in the late Latin language, men stura, or sturare, or menstruus, meaning monthly. The female menstrual cycle would normally follow the moon. Menstruation, moonstration, menopause, moonpause, mooneye, money. So we could utilize all them things in that way. Mensa means to satisfy. The moon is a feminine symbol, universally representing the rhythm of time as it embodies the cycle. The phases of the moon symbolize immortality, eternity, enlightenment, and the dark side of nature herself. Mensa literally means table in Latin. And the organization was so named because Mensa is a round table society where ethnicity, color, creed, national origin, age, politics, educational and social background are completely irrelevant. Eugenics. Originally named Montagne de la Table, after the Table Mountain in South Africa in 1756 by the French astronomer Nicolaus Louis de Lacaille. By 1763, this had been Latinized as Mons Mensae. In 1922, the International Astronomical Union shortened this to Mensa. In Roman mythology, mens, also known as mens bona, Latin for good mind, was the personification of thought, consciousness, and the mind, and also of right thinking. Lancelot Lionel Ware, OBE, an English barrister and biochemist, he co-founded Mensa, the International Society for Intellectually Gifted People, with the Austrian barrister Roland Barrel in 1946. It was originally called the High IQ Club, where undertook medical research with Henry Dale at the National Institutes of Medical Research in Hampstead, London, and became a non-clinical medical researcher. During World War II, Ware worked at Porton Down, secret research establishment. He then worked as a scientist for the Boots Company in Nottingham. It's good to know that you've got, when you go to Boots, they've all been working at Porton Down. During this time, he learnt about IQ tests. Now, the guy he worked with, Sir Henry Hallett Dale, An English pharmacologist and physiologist, Dale became the director of the Department of Biochemistry and Pharmacology at the National Institute for Medical Research in London in 1914. Dale and his colleagues first identified acetylcholine in 1914 as a possible neurotransmitter. His partner, Lowe, showed its importance in the nervous system. The two men shared the 1936 Nobel Prize for Medicine. This work basically found out that our nervous systems were controlled via chemical and electronic impulses. Acetylcholine is an organic compound that functions in the brain and body of many types of animals, including humans, as a neurotransmitter. Symptoms of choline deficiency include low energy levels, fatigue, loss of memory, decline in cognitive ability, learning disabilities, muscle aches, damage to the nerves, mood swings, and changes in behavior. Between 1938 and 1960, Dale served as chairman of the Wellcome Trust. Peter Ashton Sturgeon, medical writer, was a founder of the American Mensa Society. He was also in Spain at the same time as Orwell during the Civil War. The writer William Tenn has stated that Sturgeon became involved with POUM, P-O-U-M, if you remember we talked about that earlier, while in Spain. I wonder if Orwell met him while he were out there. He was the older brother of online fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon, and who wrote several scripts for the original Star Trek series. Just to finish this part off regarding the Mensa moon link, it's interesting, but we'll keep for another episode, because the Wedgwoods, Darwins, Galtons, etc. were founders of the Lunar Society.
Right, Lunar Society.
The Lunar Society. They actually nicknamed themselves the Lunatics.
Right.
And the Huxleys are related to all of them who founded the Lunar Society. Now, I want to go back to this acetylcholine just for a second. When we were struggling with our conditions, choline is one of the supplements that really helped us. So when I found this, it sort of lit a light up here that if you've got people who are part of, let's just say, secret societies coming up with things, choline really sparks your brain. Really sparks your brain. These things are really important to these things. That everything that we're going, anybody with chronic fatigue, for argument's sake, generally low in choline, anybody with cognitive issues, generally low in choline.
Right.
Yeah. And so if they know that, and then they decide to take that out of the food sources, for argument's sake, or add something in to the food sources that destroys it, this will be one of the things, one of the little tipping point things that is now destroying people and causing them to have mental problems, dementia, multiple sclerosis.
More fluoride, less
We've already spoke about multiple sclerosis with the Spears.
Well, they've admitted that the Spears, yeah.
During World War II, Eileen O'Shaughnessy worked for the Censorship Department of the Ministry of Information. She called Spring, Mariana Spring, which was a central government department that is responsible for publicity and propaganda. You can't make this shit up, Chris, can you?
Yeah.
From what I've seen, Eileen may have had an influence on Orwell's work. I say may, but it looks obvious to me that O'Shaughnessy had a large influence on Orwell's writing. She could have also been his helper, watcher, or handler, or all three. Orwell's novel 1984 seems to have been influenced by one of Eileen's poems. The poem was called End of the Century, 1984. In the poem, there may be similarities between the futuristic visions of Eileen's poem and that in Orwell's book 1984, including the use of mind control and the eradication of personal freedom by police state.
I mean, you could be going down the road here. Did she even write the book?
Well, she was a psychologist for a start, as we know. We've learnt that part. Yeah. She was an English teacher, I think, before. So she was some sort of writer anyway. She wrote for a brother. She did writing for a brother, and she was writing for that Cadbury's woman and reading and things like that. So, well, again, you've just hit on something there I hadn't thought of. Did she write the book?
Or was it written by committee? You know,
Yeah.
they knew what they needed to get out there.
I mentioned before that there's always links back to Huxley's. O'Shaughnessy attended Sunderland Church, as I mentioned, at Sunderland Church High School, a mixed day school. The United Church Trust is a large education charity which owned, and it's closed down now, Sunderland High School, but it owned the schools. The charity is operating under the name United Learning as of 2012. Arnold School was an independent school in Blackpool. The school was in the United Church Schools Trust group of schools and was a long-standing school within that group. Arnold House School, named after Dr. Thomas Arnold, headmaster of Rugby School. Dr. Thomas Arnold, as we mentioned before, was the great-great-grandfather of Julian and Aldous Huxley via their mother, Julia Arnold, who Lewis Carroll took pictures of as a child. And if you remember, he was the founder of modern sports.
Yeah, the Stadium Sport Rugby.
Sport Rugby. Anyway, that's just a little offshoot. What we're going to discuss next is proof of a predetermined knowledge of future events and planning operations generations in advance of the actions. Eileen's poem, End of the Century 1984, this information is from orwellsociety.com. So it's an official Orwell website. Eileen's High School in Sunderland celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1934, with gatherings and school dinners both on the school grounds and in London. Eileen is not obvious in some of the surviving photos of the celebrations, but she was well aware of the significance of the anniversary. Looking 50 years ahead to the school's 100th anniversary, she wrote a poem called End of the Century 1984, which was published in the Sunderland High School magazine in 1934, the year before she met Orwell. She would have been a 29-year-old. So there were 3 verses in this poem. Verse 1 was called Death, verse 2 was called Birth, and verse 3 was called Phoenix. End of the Century 1984. I'm not going to read all the verses out, but I'm going to read verse 3 out, just to give you a taste of what it is. Worlds have died that they may live, may plume again their fairest feathers, and in their clearest songs may give welcome to all spontaneous weathers. Bacon's colleague is called Einstein. Huxley shares Platonic food. Violet rays are only sunshine, christened in modern mood. In this house, if in no other, past and future may agree, each herself, but each the other, in curious harmony, finding both a proper place in the silken gown's embrace.
Quite crap, that, isn't it?
Yeah, but she's a writer. Or a perceived writer.
It's one of those, one of medium I've never really got poetry.
No, it's me too. The odds on Eileen writing a poem about 1984, a year before she met George, who then went on to write the novel in 1984, is absolutely off the scale, really, isn't it? Similar to Oswald / Thornley book / oboe teacher for George Martin.
What relevance has it got at the end of the century? Is that? Maybe it's even the fact that, all the dates and times and calendars been screwed with, and that is really the end of the century. Maybe it was in 1984.
Quite possibly. That's on the George Orwell Society website, so you can see that yourselves if you want to go on there. Why would it mention Huxley, who taught Orwell at Eton, which she couldn't have known about? She couldn't have known that. I mean, she did go to Oxford, but unless she had inside information, but that were at Eton, that. So, and Francis Bacon, who we'll come on to in a bit, who was close to Orwell's second wife. I read another blog site that said their time in Wallington before the Spanish Civil War was their happiest years. They worked the small land, sold odds and ends out of the cottage, and cared for a few farm animals. Eileen would make up names for the farm animals and create tales of situations the animals would get themselves into. It's believed that she influenced Orwell while he was writing Animal Farm. She was one of the very few people to see Orwell's work as it was developing. He would read what he had written while they were in bed and listen to any input Eileen had. So again, this is from sites that are sort of official sites. So she had a hand in Animal Farm and she had a hand in 1984.
Yeah.
And that's the point where his career from a writer's perspective changed.
Mm.
And one thing I've noticed about Orwell and Huxley, now I might be wrong here, so somebody can correct me. A lot of writers, if they pass away at young age, they've normally got a lot of backlogs of half-written stories that get finished off, and another writer takes over, type of thing from the family. Yeah, I've not seen that with Orwell's writing.
A lot of drafts, kind of thing.
Yeah, I've not seen that with Orwell's writing. Or there's not like thought through. Even if it was just 2 books, or what, in the same vein as Animal Farm in '84 that came out, I haven't seen that. That it just, there were them 2 books. He met her. He died. She died, and then there were no more. But anyway,
and also, like we said, all his previous books were like social commentary, and they weren't really like about this kind of thing.
No. In the book 1984, it had the Ministry of Truth, which was the Ministry of Propaganda. George Orwell actually worked for the security services, doing more or less the exact same thing, when he prepared a list that's known today as Orwell's list of notable writers and other people he considered to be unsuitable as possible writers for the anti-communist propaganda activities of the Information Research Department, a secret propaganda organisation of the British state.
Right.
The IRD, or Information Research Department, was a secret Cold War propaganda department of the British Foreign Office, created to publish anti-communist propaganda, including black propaganda. Bear in mind, many of these characters, like Orwell's friend Baron Rees, worked for the Foreign Office. The IRD translated Animal Farm into 16 languages and distributed Animal Farm in over 14 countries. This puts a new light on all that work to me. He's worked for the IRD and they're pushing his work out there.
Yeah.
Why ain't Mariana reporting on this type of thing? In June 1945, she and Eric adopted a 3-year-old boy named Richard Horatio Blair. And he is a trustee and patron after their deaths of the Orwell Society and the Orwell Foundation. He works now with a group of Orwell academics, or he did do, and enthusiasts who inspired the founding of the Orwell Society, of which he is both a patron and a trustee. 2 years later, Blair was elected trustee of the Orwell Foundation and the Orwell Youth Prize, of which he's also a patron. One other oddity was that Eileen O'Shaughnessy's death on the 29th of March 1945. Orwell had been on a journalistic assignment at the time of his wife's death, a journey into the newly liberated but still dangerous Western Europe. He had gone despite Eileen's obvious illness and imminent surgery. The child, Richard, whose adoption they were still finalising at the time, not to mention his own bad health, and his firm conviction that the Comintern had him on a hit list. He also met Ernest Hemingway while in Paris, and Ernest Hemingway gave him an handgun because he was that worried about these communists coming to kill him. And Ernest Hemingway is openly admitted to being a CIA, well, OSS as it was then, operative after the war, CIA agent. It said he run several operations, not run operations, but delivered several operations for the CIA or worse to that effect. He was signed up to the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the CIA, performing several missions during World War II. Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, and that sounds like another one of them stories, doesn't it? It gave Orwell a handgun.
Yeah, gave him a handgun. But I mean, he's operating. He's got TB. He's been shot through the throat. His wife's ill, right? Yeah. And he has to go to France.
Yeah,
on an assignment.
And you have to wonder who that adopted kid is, really. If he's taking on, you've got an adopted child who's taking on the whole Orwell estate, if you like, for the future.
Well, I mean, he looks a benign character. I've seen pictures of him, but again,
what do you want him to look like?
I know. I don't know.
Darth Vader.
Yeah. Just the Comintern, or aka the Communist International, aka the Third International, was like a communist hit squad, and it sounds like Operation Gladio. You don't know who these people are, do you? Were they communists or were they working for the banking fraternity? You don't know who they are, do you? really,
Yeah.
just to keep these people in check. If he existed, I mean, we still don't know if this were real, if the situation we're talking about were real. Orwell was working in Paris as a war correspondent for his friend's newspaper, The Observer. Didn't like Johnson and all these politicians all work for these The Guardian and all these things as well, don't they? The Observer was owned by Waldorf Astor, the second Viscount Astor. Orwell's friend was David Astor, and it was owned by his father. There are a few different reasons given for Eileen's illness. One was that she had several rapidly growing tumours. Another was that she was going in to have a hysterectomy operation. Either way, Eileen died in hospital. The words of the inquest of her death said, cardiac failure while under anaesthetic, of ether and chloroform, skillfully and properly administered for operation for removal of uterus.
Right. I mean, that would have been if they wanted to get rid of it, that would be the opportunity, wouldn't it?
We don't know what's going on. Again, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
No.
If these people know something and they're saying, I'm going to open my mouth or I'm going to tell people, you don't know what's going on, do you? Or maybe it was a total accident. We don't know. Orwell's second wife, Sonia Orwell, and she's another interesting character. I'm not going to go into loads of... I keep saying that. I'm not going to go into loads of detail on these people, but ends up being a 2-hour plus show. But anyway, there you go. She was born in 1918. She was the second wife of George Orwell, known as Sonia Orwell. Her name, though, was Brownell. She was born in Calcutta, like Orwell was born in India, and she was a daughter of another British colonial official, just like Orwell was. Her father committed suicide when she was 4-year-old. When she was 6, she was sent to a convent called the Sacred Heart in Roehampton. It's now part of the Roehampton University. It had such an effect on her that apparently, according to a book written by Hilary Spurling, and the book's called The Girl from the Fiction Department, a portrait of Sonia Orwell. As an adult, Sonia would spit whenever she saw a nun.
Well,
That's the effect it had on her.
Yeah. You do hear that a lot, don't you?
But then we go to Aldous Huxley. He wrote that Devils of Loudun that were about devil worshipping nuns. Anyway, this is a similar story to Orwell's. Born in India, sent to boarding school at a young age, hated it, etc., etc. Just at the same time, Eileen O'Shaughnessy and Orwell were getting together in 1935, when Sonia was 17, she left the convent and learnt French in Neuchâtel or Newcastle in Switzerland, and she took a secretarial course there. And here's where the story becomes a little strange. An article in the Irish Independent that I found, written on in May 2002, again by Hilary Spurling, who wrote her biography, says, she and 3 friends were sailing on a lake in Neuchâtel when the boat capsized. Only she survived. And then, only after a life-or-death struggle with a boy she tried to save. Sonia never forgot the terrible embrace of a convulsive male body stronger than her own, from somebody with a strong character and independence, and harassed as she was, despite herself, by Catholic guilt and its ideas of self-sacrifice. The sense of failure must have been an excruciating burden to carry. So, what apparently happened, they went out on a boat. There were her and another girl, and 2 young guys. The boat capsized. They drowned, but one of them was start kicking around. She went to save him, and he started dragging her down. And another story I learned is that she pushed him under and held him under so she could get away.
Did they swim? What would you do on a boat if you could?
Only she could swim, apparently. I don't know. But
you wouldn't even go on a boat if you couldn't swim, would you?
Well, I don't know. Into the middle of a lake? I don't know.
How did it capsize?
I don't know.
Strange story, isn't it?
A very strange story, yeah. After the incident, Sonia moved to a furnished room on the borders of Fitzrovia, a district of central London, England, in the West End. The once bohemian area was home to writers and artists, like the ones we've been discussing throughout these episodes. Interestingly, at this time, Sonia was involved with the Euston Road School, a term applied to a group of English painters, active either as staff or students of the School of Drawing and Painting in London between 1937 and 1939. The school was founded by William Coldstream, Victor Passmore, and Claude Rogers. Sonia had a love affair with William Menzies Coldstream, CBE, Sir William Menzies. In 1943, the War Arts Artists Advisory Committee, WWAC, offered Coldstream a full-time commission, which he accepted, having previously declined to work for the committee. Wonder what offer they made him that he couldn't refuse this time. The War Artists Advisory Committee was a British government agency established within the Ministry of Information at the outbreak of World War II in 1939, and was headed by Sir Kenneth Clarke, aka Baron Clarke, father of Tory MP Kenneth Clarke. The War Artists Advisory Committee aim was to compile comprehensive artistic record of Britain throughout the war. So Orwell's wife was working for the Ministry of Information. Now, his future wife, via this guy, seems like she's also working for the Ministry of Information. Writing or drawing pictures of what the war looked like.
Well, it's propaganda on it, or propaganda. I would imagine.
This was achieved by appointing official war artists on full-time or temporary contracts, and by acquiring artworks from other artists. When the committee was dissolved in December 1945, its collection consisted of 5,500 works of art produced by over 400 artists.
Right, like that Blackadder episode.
Yeah. The collection was then distributed to museums and institutions in Britain and around the world, with over half the collection, some 3,000 works, going to the Imperial War Museum.
Yeah.
The rewriting of history, the repainting of history.
Yeah, repainting. Well,
Sir Menzies Coldstream CBE was part of the Mass Observation Project, a social research project, originally the name of an organisation which ran from 1937 to the mid-60s, and was revived in 1981 by the University of Sussex. It was a social research project, originally the name that basically paid investigators to anonymously record people's conversations and behaviours at work, on the street, and at various public occasions, including public meetings, sporting and religious events.
So spies, basically.
No, it's a social research project, Chris.
Literally spying on the populace.
Yeah.
No, that reminds me of what to call it. You know, when you're saying about the artists. Do you remember when the Ukraine nonsense started? I remember seeing an article and they sent an artist over to the Ukraine because they wanted him to draw. I mean,
called Bono.
In this day and age, though, why would you want an artist to go and draw?
It means something, doesn't it?
The destruction of buildings or whatever. Maybe because you could just rub out the rust off the tanks. But it's funny. They were trying to make it the same kind of thing. You know, oh, this artist's gone over there. I mean, why, of all the things to do when apparently somewhere's getting annihilated, is to send the guy
take a 4K picture.
Exactly. Send a guy over with a pen and pad to doodle while all bombs are going off around him. Nonsense.
Yeah, more nonsense. During the war, there were also a few cases of mass observation, doing research on commission for the government authorities, trying to shape recruiting and war propaganda. Mary Adams, for example, employed mass observation on commission for the Ministry of Information. A revaluation of mass observation archives led to a relaunch of the project in 1981. Today, it's housed at the University of Sussex. Mass observation continues to collect the thoughts of its panel of writers through regular questionnaires known as directives. I'm sure that communists use them type of words, and is used by students, academics, media researchers, and the public for its unique collection of material on everyday life in Britain. This was an interesting part because this deserves a show on its own. There was that much information on this. It's just a data collection on behaviour.
Yeah.
Why would on art from artists and authors?
It's an early version of data collection, I suppose, like mass.
Yeah. One of several characters involved in a mass observation project was Humphrey Spender, painter and designer. He was a brother of Sir Stephen Spender, was a member of the Allied Control Commission restoring civil authority in Germany. We mentioned Spender in the last one. I think it was the last one. I've lost track now of all these episodes, but I think it was the last one where he was part, which we're going to come into, of a magazine. Spender founded literary magazine Encounter in 1953. Encounter was produced by the Society for Cultural Freedom. Criticism in the 60s was given when it emerged that much of the money used to produce the magazine had come directly from the CIA. With Cyril Connolly and Peter Watson, Spender also co-founded Horizon magazine. Remember us talking about Horizon magazine and Encounter that I mentioned in part 1 of this Mockingbird. It was last episode. Spender served as its editor from 1939 to 1941. Spencer became the professor of English at the University College London, UCL, in the late 70s. The Mass Observation Project is still running. Sussex University are in control of the project. Some of their research funders include Hewlett-Packard Foundation, which we discussed numerous times, that the people that founded that, the Hewlett-Packards, were eugenicists. The British Council. So the British Council was that organisation where I think they've got £2 billion kitty. They push British our society on the world, if you like. That's who Chris Whitty's dad worked for when he was mistakenly shot for an undercover agent in his Ford Escort that he bought from Auto Trader. The World Bank are funders of it. UNICEF, Open Society, obviously that's George Soros and his crew. The Bupa Foundation, the Bill and Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, UNESCO, which was founded by Sir Julian Huxley. There's a lot of eugenicists in that group.
Yeah, they all seem to have the same agenda, don't they?
Yeah, and there were a lot more. I mean, that was an edited version of names you probably all heard of, but that was, yeah. Interestingly, Nancy Culford Spender was the first wife of the before-mentioned William Coldstream, sister of Stephen Spender. She had an affair with Frederick Lewis McNeice, CBE, an Irish poet and playwright, and a member of the Auden Group, which included her brother Stephen Spender, who we just mentioned, and a man called Cecil Day Lewis, CBE, an Irish poet and a poet laureate. Day Lewis also wrote mystery stories under the pseudonym Nicholas Blake. During World War II, Day Lewis worked as a publications editor in the Ministry of Information for the UK government. He is the father of Sir Daniel Day Lewis.
I was going to ask you that, yeah. Is he a sir, is he, Daniel Day Lewis?
He is now, yes.
For what?
Sir Daniel Day Lewis's maternal grandfather was Sir Michael Ellis Balcon, an English film producer known for his leadership of Ealing Studios and his mentorship and guidance of a young Alfred Hitchcock. It's all organic, Chris.
It's a funny one, that Daniel Day Lewis, because he's I know he's an actor, but he's playing a part of an actor, if you know what I mean.
No, Chris, he retired and was making shoes in Italy. And then they pulled him out to make the Gangs of New York.
Yeah. He's retired and then gone off to make shoes and come back out of retirement more times. And
didn't mention his dad worked for intelligence services, though, did he?
No.
Left that little chestnut out.
What I mean, yeah, exactly. What I mean is, he looks like a lifetime actor, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he's a good actor.
Just the fact he's a good actor, but just the fact.
Actor.
But there is lauded around as this. He's such a good actor that he has to go and retire to Paris or Italy, wherever, and make shoes. Yeah. Did he make any shoes?
No, what they did was they couldn't find him. They were going around all these little shoe shops, and they were making shoes in this little cobbler's shop in Italy.
I mean, no, what I mean is, it's got such a romantic air to it, hasn't it?
Yeah,
that, he's had enough of Hollywood acting, and he's making shoes.
That reminds me of The American.
What's that?
where George Clooney was that hitman and they were hiding out in Italy.
Yeah. Just a romantic version of events. Yeah,
it's all organic, Chris.
I want to see some of Daniel Day Lewis's shoes.
Yeah. When have you ever heard Daniel Day Lewis or any of these come out and say, "Well, my maternal grandfather was Michael Balcon, who was set up Ealing Studios."
Why don't they mention that?
And he actually launched Alfred Hitchcock's career.
In Ealing Studios.
My dad works for the intelligence agency.
Didn't Ealing Studios launch who's it, Alec Guinness as well, I think?
Yeah, the Ealing Studios was like
Peter Sellers.
Yeah, what was it? Pinewood Studios and Ealing Studios were the two big studios, weren't they?
Yeah.
And his granddad were running them.
That'd be an interesting one.
That would be, like I say to you, Chris, all these little side notes that we're doing here are shows on their own. That would be a good spin-off to that. But anyway, back to Orwell's second wife as we come to a conclusion on this second part of this Mockingbird episode as part of the Huxley's Brave New World Order. Could be Orwell's Brave New World Order as well. As a young woman, Brownell was responsible for transcribing and editing the copy text for the first edition of the Winchester Le Mort d'Arthur, or Life of Arthur. As assistant to the eminent medievalist at Manchester University, Eugene Vinever. Probably destroyed that, but there you go. In 1933, Vinever was appointed professor of French language and literature at Manchester Uni. He received a doctorate from Oxford in 1950. In 1928, Vinever founded the Arthurian Society in Oxford. In 1948, the International Arthurian Society was organized by Eugene Vinever and Jean Frappier. So she's also there helping to edit the life of Arthur, King Arthur.
Yeah,
and as we found out, there's more than one King Arthur. That's the thing in it, because that's what the guys that Richard Dior interviewed wrote about. They found that there were more than one Arthur. So this King Arthur, it's King Arthur's. There's more than one Arthur. But anyway,
right, yeah.
I'm not going to get into that one. So Brownell first met Orwell when she worked as the assistant to Cyril Connolly CBE, Orwell's friend from his days at Sir Cyprian's and Eton College, at the literary magazine Horizon. So I would say, if I were a betting man that had some kind of intelligence funding, if the person that was also there, that Stephen Spender, who was set up Encounter magazine that were funded by CIA, this Horizon magazine became, what did they say, the best artistic magazine?
Yeah,
something like that. And it, yeah,
was it literally literal journal like about reviewing books? Was it book reviews?
That's correct. Yeah. Orwell. After Orwell died, Sonia married a guy called Michael Pitt Rivers in 1958. Major Michael Augustus, there's that name again, Lane Fox Pitt Rivers, of a West Country landowner who gained notoriety in Britain in the 1950s when he was put on trial and charged with buggery. Michael Pitt Rivers was a descendant of the Earls of Lascelles. His estate is worth over 50 million now. The Lascelles also owned Airwood House in Yorkshire.
Leeds.
Yeah. Not surprisingly, the couple divorced in 1965 after he'd been charged with buggery. Brownell also had affairs with several British painters, including Lucian Freud, William Coldstream, and Victor Passmore. She also had an affair with French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, whom she described as a true love. Sonia was also close friends with many writers and artists, including Pablo Picasso, who drew a sketch in her honour, which he marked just Sonia. Brownell was fiercely protective of Orwell's estate and edited, with Ian Angus, the collected essays, journalism and letters of George Orwell, published in 1968. Remember, this were published with Secker Warburg, and Secker Warburg also had CIA links back then. After Orwell's death, Sonia Orwell is believed to have been the model for Julia, the heroine of 1984, or the film 1984, which was released on the 10th of October 1984, known as the girl from the fiction department.
Yeah, I didn't know that fact, yeah.
Sonia also collaborated with the Information Research Department, which helped to increase the international fame of Animal Farm and 1984. Sonia then sold the rights of Animal Farm to the CIA. This deal resulted in the creation of a propaganda animation film called Animal Farm, released in 1954, which became the first feature-length animated film in Britain. Remember, this is just 4 years after Orwell died. She was left his entire estate. She was only married to him for 3 months.
Yeah. And that book had only been out for 5 or 6 years as well.
Yeah, what, 1949 or something released it.
Yeah, I think it was 1949. Written in 48, came out in 49. That's a fact. I mean, you think in them days, Fire, getting an animation film made 5 years later. I've seen that. I remember seeing that as a kid.
Terrifying.
Terrified me and made me blub because a clobber gets taken away, don't it, at Knackers Yard. Remember the big horse?
Yeah. Working for the CIA. How many CIA links do you need? I mean, all these affairs she's having with authors and things like that, it just reminds me of a James Bond film where these people are going around sleeping with people to get information. Not just men, women, men as well. But
yeah, but a lot of the women were the unsung heroes of the world wars, weren't they? Apparently,
On a side note, Animal Farm, the 1954 animated film, directed by animators John Hallas and Joy Batchelor. It was produced by those two and funded in part by the CIA, who also made changes to the original movie script. Although the film was a financial failure and took 15 years to generate a profit, it quickly became a staple in classrooms across the UK, the US, and other English-speaking countries like Australia, Canada, and New Zealand in the 1980s. So, I mean, you're talking 30 years on, aren't you?
How would you get that much clout for? And it's funny,
because the one that used to have that much clout, that's why.
And it's funny that the CIA isn't supposed to operate on American soil, is it? Is that right? Just on foreign policies and stuff. Yeah. But they can do this in England.
Yeah. So and MI5 can do it over there. Can do it over there. Yeah. So it's just nonsense, isn't it? As usual. The film rights for a film adaptation of Animal Farm were bought from Orwell's widow after she was approached by agents working for the Office of Policy Coordination, a branch of the CIA that dealt with the use of culture to combat communism. That's what the British that one which is Dad worked for.
It's all combating communism, isn't it? This mythical bloody organization that's out to get you. I mean, it reminds you of
Mariana Spring.
Well, no, it reminds you of the war on the Muslims, yeah. Don't it? Just a different.
You're either with us or you're with the terrorists.
Yeah. You don't know where they are. They could get you any minute.
Yeah,
actually reminds you of the previous bloody convent, doesn't it? Could get you anywhere. You never know where it's going to land.
Yeah.
Nuclear bombs. You never know where it's going to land. It could get you anywhere.
Just get you side under your table.
Just shit yourself. That's what we want you to do.
The Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, was the covert operation wing of the CIA. In 1952, it was merged with the Office of Special Operations to form the Directorate of Plans, the DDP, which is now known as the Directorate of Operations, part of the CIA. The Office of Policy Coordination created Operation Mockingbird, headed by Frank Wisner. Film critic C.A. Lejeune, a.k.a. Caroline Alice Lejeune, wrote at the time, "I salute Animal Farm as a fine piece of work. The production team, the CIA, have made a film for the eye, ear, heart, and mind."
Yeah, within your hearts and minds.
Yeah. Caroline Alice Lejeune's father was Adam Edward Lejeune, who was born in Frankfurt in 1845 of Huguenot ancestry. She was a film critic for The Observer from 1928 to 1960. This seems to be Operation Mockingbird. So she was part of probably Operation Mockingbird pre and post World War II. So she's writing a story pushing in The Observer, doing her job to push the narrative. Lejeune also formed an enduring friendship early on in her career with Sir Alfred Hitchcock. There he is again. Orwell also worked for The Observer, as did Orwell's friend, one of his best friends, David Astor. In fact, Astor's father owned The Observer, as I mentioned, and he owned the Yorkshire Post newspaper as well.
Right. His job, yeah.
Together with Orwell's friend, David Astor, and the Orwell's literary executor, Richard Rees, or to give him his full title, Sir Richard Lodowick Edward Montague Rees, 2nd Baronet, was a British diplomat, stroke spy, writer and painter. And we mentioned him in part 1. Rees was the inspiration for the character Ralverston, who was the wealthy publisher of the socialist magazine Antichrist in Orwell's book Keep the Aspidistra Flying. Together with David Astor, David Rees and Sonia Orwell, they established the George Orwell Archive at the UCL, University College London, which keeps popping up, which opened in 1960. The UCL website states, "The George Orwell Archive is the most comprehensive body of research material relating to author George Orwell anywhere." There's no video. Don't mention anything about video or film or audio recordings. Strangely, his wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, was studying at UCL when she met Orwell. Orwell worked at the Yorkshire Post with Astor. Orwell went to work for The Observer during the war. or World War II as a correspondent in Paris. The Observer was owned by the Astors. PM David Cameron is also part of the Astor family now, and he also descends from William IV, who was a descendant of George III, who also has a line going back. He also has a line going back to King Henry VII. David Cameron is married into the Astors via his mother-in-law, Annabel Lucy Veronica Astor, Viscountess Astor. His wife, Samantha, also has royal bloodline from Charles II. The Astors family, known as the Landlords of New York, were number one in Fritz Springmeier's book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati. I think Fritz Springmeier there, just pausing a sec, when you talk about that Damien Prometheus bloodline, I think that is what he was getting at, really. Yeah, Astor bought 2 burial plots when he learned that Orwell had asked to be buried in an English country courtyard. And so his mate, Astor, they're both buried together in the same graveyard.
Right.
Bear in mind, again, the last line that I said, that Fritz Springmeier's book had the Astors as number... Because it was A. I'm not saying it was number 1, but Astor was one of the main bloodlines of the Illuminati. Yeah. Sonia Orwell, Orwell's second wife, died penniless in London of a brain tumour in December 1980, having spent a fortune apparently trying to protect Orwell's name and having been swindled out of her remaining funds by an unscrupulous accountant named Jack Harrison.
Right.
Seems to happen a lot. Her friend, artist stroke painter Francis Bacon, paid off her outstanding debts.
Right. I used to, I when I was more into art, or brainwashed by the fucking art scene, if you like, I went to see a Francis Bacon exhibition. I think I mentioned actually that I just feel that guy owns a Francis Bacon.
Right.
Yeah. I think I might have told this story.
It's a council, isn't it, that own it? And it's worth
it's worth millions. He's
one
of the most expensive artists Britain's ever produced, except for, I think, what's his name? Freud, I think, is the other one. Them two. Right. Yeah, well, I know Freud was the most. His paintings, I think I might be wrong, but I think he was just most expensive living artist.
Right.
I think Bacon was as well in his day.
Right.
Or when he died. Anyway, they're worth millions. But
how interesting is this though? That Francis Bacon, the artist, also shares a common ancestor all the way back to Edward III with George Orwell, Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley, and Sir Charles Darwin.
I mean,
and he's paying off his second wife's debts. I wonder if these people know that bloodline is.
You've got to ask yourself as well about Bacon, right? I mean, I quite liked his paintings, but he's not particularly that.
I must admit, I know nothing about him.
Well, he did quite graphically. He was openly gay, I think, and he did like quite horrific paintings. So I kind of like that kind of dark kind of painting, like my sculptures, really. But I'm not into that stuff. I'm not even a goth or a blooming. I don't even like horror films anymore. But I like making weird paintings and whatever. But what I mean is, he seems like what you know of him. He seems like a character, Francis Bacon. He doesn't seem like a real. I'll tell you that. I think I mentioned this before. I once went to see an art exhibition with Asher-Beatles, and it was a Francis Bacon exhibition in London. And he hadn't done one for years anyway. We went to see it. And Seb was studying art, so we said we'd go, and he was studying Francis Bacon, so we said we'd go. I'd take him to this thing. He was only about 12 or something, 14, I can't remember. And he went up to it. I remember Seb went right up to it, and he said, "You see them pencil lines there, Dad?" Francis Bacon said he never used to. He just made things up as he went along, but you can see where he's actually drawn it and then painted it.
Right.
And even Seb, like 14-year-old, was questioning this artist.
Yeah.
And he'd swing, from like a Cockney accent to like a posh English accent,
right?
Which I always thought was quite odd.
Yeah.
So it'd be like Cockney geezer accent, and he was one of those drinkers around. So on. Just seemed like a character to me.
Yeah. Well, like we're peeling the onion back. Throughout this Brave New World Order series, we're both learning new stuff.
Well, if there's lifetime actors as actors, and then there's lifetime actors as authors, or I mean, MI5 or whatever the hell they are,
singers.
Why not artists? Of course they would be.
Of course they would be.
It's more brainwashing material, isn't it?
Well, they're either not very good artists, so they have to draw or put sheep in formaldehyde or something like that. So and they come up with these nonsense ideas, so everyone points at the king's new clothes, emperor's new clothes type of thing. Or they are really good artists, and they're controlled to a point where they end up knocked off, and their art really goes through the roof. But either way,
It's all about who buys them. Yeah, it's a sham. It's a sham.
Yeah. The whole thing is a controlled.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, you seen a painting in a shop and liking it and buying it. Different story.
Yes.
But the art world is a sham.
Yeah, the art world. I mean, some of the famous art, you'll know this might be better. Didn't even on show anywhere. They're just locked away.
Yeah. Well, I went to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. It's like going to Disneyland. You know what I mean? It's not real, is it?
No. Anyway, Francis Bacon apparently is related to the Sir Francis Bacon.
I always wondered about that. Really?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who was also an artist and a poet, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but they're quite a bit. It's interesting. I did some bits of genealogy research, and it is quite interesting. But I didn't really want to get into that because we're not really. It's not about that, but it sort of is about that. But this episode isn't about that. You could go on for
maybe
hours
we should do one on that.
The artists. We've already found two that we want to do, just within this one. The other one being the actor.
Yeah.
Of My Left Foot.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Daniel Day-Lewis has opened up a different door, a whole new Mockingbird.
And I said to you after we did that, after we spoke about that I always thought it was weird, that Daniel Day-Lewis, that story of him going off to Italy, and it always seemed odd to me. Never seemed.
Yeah.
It just seemed a romanticized story again.
Yeah, it might be true, but the whole thing, I don't know. His dad works for intelligence. His granddad owned a film studio, and he becomes an Oscar-winning knighted actor. I don't know. It just seems very convenient. But anyway, there you go. Okay, we're going to wrap this one up. We've got the next one will be the last one in this little 3-part series of George Orwell. And I'm not saying we've covered every single thing about George Orwell, but I hope we've covered a large portion of it. To me, it looks like an operation. And I don't know about Chris, but it looks like some kind of operation. Who knows what went on? Who knows why? But something happened, because he was writing totally different books to the last 2 books that he wrote. And the last 2 books he wrote, as we showed earlier on in this episode, his first wife seemed to have a big part in writing. And he just met her and then wrote these 2 and then died. And she died not long before. And he was surrounded by intelligence operatives.
And then books are in every school.
Yes, every school.
I mean, even if you think of it on a monetary value file, whoever's got the rights to them books.
CIA.
No, but as soon as you say what that book's going to be in every school because it's part of the curriculum, then someone's making a shit ton of cash, aren't they?
And also, we know it's part of the social engineering of some nature, because communism apparently is gone, but yet they're still making kids read it, and they're still lauding it as a great book, but it's past, it's gone. They're not talking about the Boer War, are they? Or the
communism's gone. But as soon as someone tells you can't leave your house, I reckon that's pretty much communism.
Is it? I didn't realise that.
In fact, it's beyond communism, isn't it?
Yeah, beyond communism. That maybe there's the new political movement beyond communism.
We tell you when you can leave your house.
Ultra fash.
When we can tell if you can see your granny or stand near someone, that is beyond.
We'll tell you that if you go see your granny, she's going to die. You'll kill her. But in reality, we're going to kill her.
Yeah. How's that?
How about that one? And it's your fault. You've brought this upon yourself. Anyway, let's go, because we're going down a totally different hole there. Yeah. So we'll see you next time. Bye.
Be a part of the oceans and skies.